Chapter 61. In the end, the Tatar was whipped to death by the woman. Perhaps it was because Ning Shu had set a bad example, or because the woman hated the Tatar who had violated her to the bone, but the first lash of the whip was aimed at the Tatar's crotch. This was a man's weakest spot. Being whipped meant losing half of one's life. Here, other than Ning Shu, all the men felt a chill in their crotches. Looking at the mangled Tatar below, even the soldiers of the great Yong dynasty felt a chill run down their spines. After the Tatar died, the woman suddenly burst into tears. Her cries were heart-wrenching as she called for her father and mother. Immediately wiping away her tears, she walked in front of Ning Shu and knelt down with a plop. Raising the whip with both hands, she presented it to Ning Shu. However, because of this action, the cloak on her body could not cover her body, revealing her naked body. However, these men all lowered their heads in unison, not daring to look. What had happened just now had shattered the courage of these men. Ning Shu took the whip and looked at the woman in front of him. Her skin had the characteristics of the borderlands. It was somewhat dark, but her hair was very thick. She could not be considered beautiful, but her thick eyebrows gave her an unswerving determination. "General, let me follow General and go into battle to kill the Tatar." Ning Shu pleaded. "I already have no place to go. The Tatar killed my family and destroyed my home." Ning Shu extended his hand and pulled her onto his horse. He asked, "What is your name?" "You will follow by my side." "I, your servant, commoner, lowly one." The woman did not know how to address herself. Her face was both black and red. "You can directly address me as your servant. In the future, you will follow by my side. You can address me as princess." Ning Shu actually wanted to have a woman by his side. It was quite convenient. "Princess?" The woman looked at Ning Shu in shock. She clearly did not expect that a princess of a country would come to the borderlands to fight. "Princess, please bestow a name. Your servant's life is given by princess." Ning Shu spoke sonorously and forcefully. Her voice was extremely solemn and firm. A smile appeared on Ning Shu's face. Who said that women were inferior to men? Perhaps they were inferior to men in terms of physical strength, but don't underestimate a woman's tenacity. "From today onwards, you will follow me. You will be named Kai Sang." Ning Shu was quite happy. She finally had her own team, even though she was only one person. However, it belonged to her completely. Just now, when she wanted to bring people here, no one paid any attention to her. These men still looked down on women, even if she was a princess. Women were women, they should stay at home and nurse their children. The battlefield was for men to play. Kai Sang was very respectful to Ning Shu. She went to the side to put on her clothes and did not sit with Ning Shu. Instead, she led the horse for Ning Shu. "Take these Tatars back and interrogate them properly. They should be spies," Ning Shu said indifferently with a cold face. He had to pretend to be cool to the end. Actually, pretending to be cool wasn't easy at all. Ning Shu turned his horse around, preparing to return to the camp. The sound of hoofbeats could be heard from not far away. Moreover, there were quite a few people. Ning Shu's heart froze. He immediately said to Duan Xinghui, "Quickly release the signal flare." Duan Xinghui immediately pulled the trigger, causing the signal flare to explode in the air. After a short while, a group of Tatar cavalry arrived. They were extremely imposing. Their horses were fat and strong, and they kicked up a large cloud of dust. Just this imposing manner was enough to cause the people of Great Yong to panic. Even the troops panicked, their faces revealing expressions of fear and uneasiness. Ning Shu shouted, "What are you panicking for? Stand properly for me." Regardless of how a battle was fought, the troops had to be orderly and imposing. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes as he looked at the leader of the Tatars. It could only be said that enemies often cross paths. At the very front of the Tatars was the second prince, Helianing. Second prince, second prince. Seeing Hellion Ing, the captured Tatars immediately shouted excitedly. Then, they looked at Ning Shu with complacency and resentment in their eyes. Ning Shu lashed out with his whip, producing an ear-piercing explosive sound. It formed an afterimage, immediately silencing the Tatars. They felt as if they were fighting against each other. Seeing Princess Jiehui intimidate the Tatars with a single whip, the soldiers of Great Yong puffed out their chests, looking rather imposing. Hellion Ing was wearing animal leather, revealing some of his chest. He looked even wilder than when he was in the capital. His entire body was brimming with a bewitching wildness. Hellion Ing first looked at the scout on the ground who had been whipped until he no longer had a human shape. A dark and gloomy expression flashed across his eyes. Then, he looked at the armored Ning Shu. You shouldn't have done this. Hellion Ying's tone was very languid, but it was also very dangerous. You didn't want to marry me for peace, and now you want to lead troops into battle. Princess Jiehui, you have truly exceeded my expectations. Only a woman like you is worthy of this prince. Hellion Ing extended his hand, grabbing in Ning Shu's direction. Ning Shu smiled wickedly. Just obediently marry me for peace. There is no need to cause trouble here. You killed my warriors of the northern desert. Let your Great Yong soldiers pay for it. If I kill one warrior, this prince will slaughter 100 soldiers and 100 commoners. If I kill 2, this prince will slaughter 500 soldiers. Hellion Ing bared his teeth, his eyes flickering with a cold luster. Hellion Ying's voice, mixed with the cold wind, reached everyone's ears, causing them to shiver involuntarily. Princess Jiehui, come with this prince. Hellion Ing looked at Ning Shu. If you come with me, I will release this group of people. Princess, let this general go and fight. Duan Xinghui's expression was unsightly as Ning Shu pleaded. Withdraw. Ning Shu reprimanded. Duan Xinghui's face was filled with unwillingness as he looked at the languid yet extremely dangerous Hellion Ing. Are you saying that you want to come with me? A smile appeared on Hellion Ying's face, his expression somewhat joyous. Ning Shu extended his hand. You are the first woman that this prince has admired, and also the woman that is most worthy of this prince. Ning Shu wanted to vomit in this man's face. So cool. Does he really think that he is so great? Ning Shu sneered. With a flick of his whip, he lashed out at the lower part of a Tatar captive. The Tatar captive was whipped to death. Ning Shu's movements were too fast. Even Hellion Ing was stunned for a moment. He immediately gripped the reins tightly, looking at Ning Shu with a malicious expression. Princess Jiehui, do not attempt to infuriate this prince. The soldiers of Great Yong all looked at Ning Shu in astonishment, feeling as if they were looking up at a lofty mountain. Ning Shu ignored Hellion Ying's unsightly expression, saying, This is the fate of those who humiliate the women of Great Yong. This prince will whip every single one of them to death, especially you bandits who steal Great Yong's provisions and prey on Great Yong's people. If this prince does not whip these human-faced animals to death, then this prince is not Great Yong's princess. Lacking propriety, righteousness, integrity, and shame. This prince would rather die than marry into Great Yong. Hellion Ing, who do you think you are to make this prince follow you? Chapter 62. Do you people of the northern desert not even have a bronze mirror? Why don't you take a look at yourselves? Without a bronze mirror, take a piss and look at your own reflection. Do you really think that you are the best in the world? Ning Shu scolded with great pleasure. Every time he saw Hellion Ying's expression, as if it was his honor to have taken a fancy to him, Ning Shu felt his balls ache. He looked like an idiot. After being scolded by Ning Shu, these burly Tatar men felt their blood boil. Each of them stared at Ning Shu with wide eyes, wishing that they could eat Ning Shu alive. Ning Shu sneered, but his mind was filled with curses. What the hell was Shin Feng doing? Why hadn't he come after such a long time? He was only a few steps away. Ning Shu's heart sank. If he didn't deal with these people when he returned alive, there would be many more such incidents in the future. He Lianing didn't even care about her image, cursing like a shrew on the streets. She had painstakingly created the image of a noble and elegant princess. Hearing Ning Shu's abuse, He Lianing's face revealed a sullen and cruel expression. In a cold voice, he said, "Princess Jihui, you are trying to infuriate me. Do you not care about the soldiers behind you?" Ning Shu sneered. "Of course, I can't do anything about it. Even if I were to die, it would be me who dies in front of them." "He Lianing, aren't you being too arrogant to act recklessly in Great Yong's territory?" Ning Shu only knew how to argue. He had no advantage in fighting. Moreover, it was cavalry against infantry. He would be killed in an instant. "Princess Jihui, it is not that this prince is arrogant, nor is it that our warriors of the northern desert are arrogant. It is that your Great Yong soldiers are cowards, not daring to face the warriors of the northern desert. You don't have the slightest bit of courage. For such a country, this prince can only hee your sister." Ning Shu cursed inwardly. He Lianing's words caused the citizens of Great Yong to feel extreme humiliation. They looked at He Lianing with bloodshot eyes. "Princess, this general requests permission to fight," Ning Shu said in a deep voice, his tone sonorous. Ning Shu was speechless. Could he win in this situation? Could it be that all wars are fought alone? "Are you going to fight alone?" Ning Shu and Duan Xinghui asked in a low voice. Duan Xinghui watched as Ning Shu leaned over to talk to him. For some reason, Duan Xinghui's heart began to thump violently. He puffed out his chest and said, "Let me fight the enemy's general first." Fuck, was it really a one-on-one fight before a group fight? He Lianing saw that Ning Shu was chatting with a man without looking at the situation. He Lianing shouted coldly, "Princess Jihui. What are you shouting for? Can't you see that we're discussing something?" Ning Shu said snappily. He Lianing was speechless. He Lianing raised his head. The Tatar cavalry behind him immediately surrounded Ning Shu's group. The Great Yong soldiers stood back to back, raising their red-tasseled spears and waiting solemnly. Ning Shu's expression chilled as he looked at He Lianing. He Lianing sat leisurely on his horse. Looking at Ning Shu, a pleased smile appeared on his face. "Princess Jihui, have you thought it through? Those who are engaged will be my wife, those who run will be my concubine. He Lianing, you want me to go with you? What is my status?" Ning Shu had no choice but to feign civility with He Lianing. "Princess." Duan Xinghui couldn't help but shout. Ning Shu ignored Duan Xinghui. Shen Feng still hadn't come. He really didn't place her, the princess, in his eyes. "Of course you are this prince's consort. This prince's lands, cattle, sheep, and slaves are all yours." He Lianing's voice was filled with temptation. Ning Shu really wanted to spit at He Lianing's face. She didn't have anything in Great Yong. Why would she need He Lianing's things? Her fief was even more than He Lianing's. "He Lianing, this consort has always wanted to fight with you. If you want this consort to leave with you, you'll have to see if you have the ability." Ning Shu sneered, "Tell your people not to move. The two of us will fight." Ning Shu knew that this battle had to be fought. It wasn't only for the sake of morale, but also to make this body no longer fear He Lianing. Seeing He Lianing, this body reflexively trembled. Ning Shu clenched his teeth. From the bottom of his heart, he felt that He Lianing wasn't undefeatable. In the future, he would fight with He Lianing many times. Could it be that he would tremble every time? Touching the whip at his waist, Ning Shu looked at He Lianing. "Let's fight one-on-one." He Lianing looked at Ning Shu with a very tolerant gaze, as if she was looking at a naughty pet. She extended her claws, wanting to scratch him. "As you wish. If you lose, will you have to go with this prince?" He Lianing's lips curled into a smile. "This prince is very interested in you." Ning Shu lashed out with his whip, clamping the horse's belly. With a coquettish snort, he galloped towards He Lianing. Ning Shu used all his strength to lash out with his whip. He Lianing ducked and dodged. Ning Shu had to control his trembling body while fighting with He Lianing. He Lianing originally wanted to tease Ning Shu. However, seeing Ning Shu's grave expression, she showed no mercy. He Lianing's heart also became cautious. She drew out the broadsword at her waist, blocking Ning Shu's sharp whip. Duan Xinghui watched from the side, very worried. His lips were tightly closed, his gaze following He Lianing's figure. Especially when he saw He Lianing's sparkling eyes looking at Princess Jiahui, Duan Xinghui felt very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. He Lianing laughed heartily. Her voice was low and sexy, carrying a swift and fierce aura with it. She wrapped Ning Shu's whip around her saber, grabbed Ning Shu's whip, and pulled Ning Shu in front of her. Ning Shu was speechless. Feeling the hand around her waist, she felt very disgusted. It was as if a caterpillar had landed on her skin. Ning Shu struggled with all her might, but she couldn't break free. Moreover, her nose was filled with a wild smell. Let go of this princess. Ning Shu coldly rebuked. He Lianing met her clear and cold gaze. It was clear and cold, like a snow lotus swaying in the wind on a snowy mountain. Dishonest little wild cat. He Lianing said in a low voice, tightly hugging Ning Shu's waist. Fuck, did she have to disgust people to death? He Lianing, this slut, was definitely the biggest obstacle to her completing this mission. You damned Tatar, let go of Princess Jiahui. Duan Xinghui shouted. His expression was anxious and unsightly. He Lianing didn't pay any attention to Duan Xinghui. Instead, she looked at Ning Shu. Ning Shu sneered and raised her leg to kick He Lianing's lower part. He Lianing's legs clamped down on Ning Shu's legs, making it so that Ning Shu couldn't move. Then, she lowered her head to look at her colorful face. He Lianing looked meaningfully at Ning Shu. Fuck, Ning Shu's embarrassment turned into anger. The heavens gave men strong bodies, but they used this strength on women. What kind of morality was this? He Lianing was using strength to crush her. Ning Shu took a deep breath. She was someone who had practiced exceptional martial arts. Ning Shu used all her strength to raise her knee and kick He Lianing's lower part. Chapter 63. Ning Shu originally wanted to give He Lianing a kick that would end her descendants. However, He Lianing quickly dodged, while Ning Shu broke free from He Lianing's control. Taking advantage of the situation, he lashed out with his whip at He Lianing's body. Caught off guard, He Lianing was struck by the tail of the whip. Immediately, she felt a burning pain on her arm. He Lianing's complexion changed, turning pale. Even her forehead broke out in a cold sweat. Ning Shu mounted his horse. Seeing He Lianing's appearance, he could not help but proudly ask, "How does it feel? Does it feel like you're in ecstasy?" This prince's whip has been soaked in chilly water and added a strong ingredient. How does it feel? Moreover, you have already been poisoned. He Lianing's handsome eyebrows creased, her face twitching. Afterwards, Ning Shu smiled, revealing his sinister teeth. This prince likes this style. Ning Shu's eyelids twitched. This He Lianing was truly perverted. Even in this state, she could still chat cheerfully and wittily with him. Second prince. Hearing Ning Shu say that the whip was poisoned, the people behind He Lianing became very worried. They looked at Ning Shu with sinister eyes. Despicable woman from Great Yong. Ha, these Tatars had the nerve to call her shameless. No matter how shameless she was, she could not be more shameless than these Tatars who burned, killed, and pillaged. How could these rats be qualified to call others shameless? He Lianing ignored the worries of her subordinates. Instead, she faced Ning Shu, licking her lips with her tongue. Bewitchingly and wildly, she commanded, "Other than Jiahui, kill everyone else." Yes, Ning Shu's face darkened. In a deep voice, he commanded, "Officers and soldiers, the Tatars have trampled on our territory, bullying and humiliating our wives and daughters. We must drive these bandits out of our territory. We must defend the country and protect our wives and daughters. Defend the country and protect the country." A low and solemn voice resounded through the forest. The soldiers' faces were solemn and determined to die. Seeing Princess Jihui raise her whip, everyone felt hot blood rush to their hearts. Helianing looked at Ning Shu maliciously. "Do you really think that these people can defeat this prince's cavalry? Jihui, come with this prince. This prince will give you unparalleled glory. You will be this prince's woman in this lifetime, the only woman." Helian Ying's hand was stained with blood. Ning Shu stretched out his hand, and the blood on his hand dripped into the dust. It looked cruel and enchanting. Ning Shu sneered. Facing the Tatar cavalry charging towards her, she threw out her whip and wrapped it around the Tatar's neck. The Tatar's neck was immediately dripping with blood. After struggling for a while, he stopped breathing. "Helianing, this princess is Great Yong's princess. This princess glory will be given by Great Yong. Even if this princess were to die, this princess will die on Great Yong's soil. You want this princess to leave with you? Keep dreaming." Ning Shu berated. Helianing shook her head. She looked at Ning Shu with treacherous eyes and said, "I like you the way you are. You seem to be wilder than the women of the northern desert." Ning Shu thought, "This slut thinks too highly of herself." The sounds of weapons colliding, blood spurting, and swords piercing bodies could be heard. Ning Shu clenched his teeth. Out of the corner of his eye, he could even see the Tatar horses trampling over the corpses of Great Yong soldiers, shattering their bones. An indescribable grief and hatred welled up in Ning Shu's heart. Facing the charging Tatar cavalry, she lashed out with her whip. The barbs dug into the Tatar cavalry's face and even into their eyes. When she pulled her whip out, she even pulled out her eyeballs. Giddy up, giddy up. Finally, the sound of hooves could be heard from the distance. They had been waiting for reinforcements all this time, but only now had they arrived. A Great Yong general led his troops over. Seeing the ground littered with corpses, he repeatedly said, "Against the Tatars." Helianing didn't bring a lot of cavalry. Faced with so many people, Helianing looked at Ning Shu, whose face was covered in blood and only her bright eyes could be seen. Helianing then said to her subordinates, "Come back." The Tatar cavalry immediately retreated behind Helianing, solemnly awaiting Great Yong's arrival. Ning Shu touched the fresh blood on his face. The thick smell of blood assaulted his nose, making him feel nauseous. Ning Shu did not dare to be careless. He looked at Helianing, the hand holding the whip trembling slightly. Helianing smiled leisurely at Ning Shu. He was clearly injured, but other than his face being pale, he did not seem to feel any pain. Truly ruthless, so ruthless even to herself. Helianing pointed at the captured Tatars and indifferently said, "Release the warriors of the northern desert." Ning Shu was so angry that he laughed. What kind of situation was this? He could not help but say, "So what if I don't release them? No matter how powerful your northern desert cavalry is, my Great Yong will use 10 lives to exchange for a single northern desert Tatar. If 10 is not enough, then we will use 100. Helian Ying's pupils constricted. She suddenly laughed, looking at Ning Shu with eyes that grew brighter and brighter. Finally, she smiled. This smile actually contained a trace of admiration. Helianing extended her finger and rubbed the sand on her lips. It is hard to imagine that in this bustling, befuddled place, there would still be such a backbone. Even Great Yong's border guards do not dare to speak to this prince like this. Jihui, you should not have been born in Great Yong. Instead, you should have been a woman galloping through the grasslands. Ning Shu sneered. In order to not be married to you, I can pay any price. Now, Ning Shu did not know if this mission could be completed. When countries collided with each other, an individual was truly too insignificant. She had to break away from this man for the original owner of her body. Now, it seemed that the power of the plot was too great. She had broken away from the marriage, but He Lianing, this man, had actually pestered her. Men were all cheap. If they could not be obtained, then they were good. The original owner of her body had been incomparably cruel to her during the marriage. Now, she actually wanted her to leave with him. This was simply trampling on Great Yong's and Li Wen's faces. Helian Ying's actions were more likely to strike a blow to Great Yong's morale. Imagining her own country's princess disregarding etiquette, justice, integrity, and shame and running away with the enemy's prince, especially when she was previously the subject of a marriage alliance, it was simply a huge joke. She would go down in infamy for 10,000 years. Ning Shu sneered, a place where the monarch is neither monarch nor subject, where the father is neither father nor son, where there are no 3 cardinal principles and 5 cardinal principles. How can this incomparably corrupt northern desert be a place where this prince, a person as pure as ice and as pure as jade, can stay? He Lianing, scram back to wherever you came from. Die. Helian Ying's face grew paler and paler. Hearing Ning Shu's words, she spat out a mouthful of blood. Of course, how could someone as thick-skinned as He Lianing be so angered by Ning Shu to vomit blood? Instead, the poison had flared up. You really poisoned me. He Lianing wiped the black blood from the corner of her mouth. Ning Shu spread out his hands innocently. This prince is an honest person. I never lie. Helian Ying's gaze scanned Ning Shu's face, scraping it inch by inch. Then, she smiled ostentatiously. Princess Jihui, you should prepare to be pestered by this prince for the rest of your life. This prince is so scared. Ning Shu patted his chest. This prince likes to see you scratching your heart and lungs but unable to obtain this prince. Go. He Lianing spat out another mouthful of blood, ordering the northern desert cavalry. Chapter 64. He Lianing turned her horse around and prepared to leave, no longer caring about the captured Tatars. Ning Shu sneered. Great Yong's territory is not a place where you can come and go as you please. Ning Shu took the bow and arrow. Circulating his qi, he pulled the bowstring into the shape of a full moon. The arrowhead flickered with a cold luster as it aimed at Helian Ying's back. Ning Shu loosened her grip and the arrow flew towards He Lianing with a whistling sound. He Lianing dodged Ning Shu's bow and arrow by lying on the horse's back. The bow and arrow pierced through the tree trunk with a ding sound. He Lianing looked at the arrow in the tree trunk and could not help but turn her head to glance at Ning Shu. She sat coolly on the back of her horse, her eyes cold and full of killing intent. Ning Shu was somewhat disappointed that he had not disposed of He Lianing. Sure enough, she had been a scourge for 1,000 years. If He Lianing had died so easily, it would have been unrealistic. In short, the original owner of his body and He Lianing were entangled. In his previous life, they had been fated to be husband and wife. How could fate be so easily severed? Sorting out his thoughts, Ning Shu turned his head and coldly said, "Clean up the battlefield. Register the dead soldiers and reward them according to their merits. Give their families 3 times the compensation." Ning Shu looked at the corpses on the ground. Some had been trampled beyond recognition by the horses. Some had even been split in 2. Their internal organs and intestines were still steaming. The dust had been dyed black by the blood, and the thick stench of blood made one dizzy. War was cruel. War was cruel. The corners of Ning Shu's eyes were a little hot. She sneered and looked at the late general. When he met Ning Shu's eyes, the general was stunned and then looked away. He cupped his fist and said to Ning Shu, "Princess, where are the Tatars? The heads of the Tatars can be exchanged for military merits." The general's eyes lit up as he looked at the Tatars. Even though they had arrived late, they still wanted to snatch the credit. Shen Qingqing felt extremely displeased with Great Yong's officers and soldiers. No wonder the Tatars were so unbridled in their territory. Why didn't they spend their energy fighting the Tatars? Shen Qingqing looked at him and said coldly, "Whoever dares to touch these Tatars, I will cripple him." "What, do you want the credit?" "This general does not dare." The general hurriedly lowered his head. Ning Shu was not only a princess, but also the left vanguard. Her status was higher than his. The man's heart was filled with displeasure and grievance. Ning Shu didn't care what these people thought. He shouted, "Return to the camp." Kai Sang, who was saved by Ning Shu, was leading the horse. She looked at Ning Shu with sparkling eyes. When they returned to the camp, Ning Shu directly ordered his men to escort nearly 20 Tatars to the high platform of the drill ground in the middle of the camp. Perhaps they had become accustomed to being unbridled on Great Yong's borders. Although they were afraid when faced with the pitch-black soldiers below, they were certain that Great Yong's soldiers would not dare to kill them. Their expressions were filled with provocation. Ning Shu first knelt on one knee and saluted to Shen Feng in the tent. Then he reported the situation. In addition, he recounted how the general had arrived late and disregarded the life and death of his comrades. The general's face immediately darkened. He looked at Ning Shu with eyes filled with deep-seated resentment. Ning Shu sneered and stroked the whip at his waist. How could he fight when the hearts of his soldiers were so divided? He had to concentrate his efforts in one direction. There were bound to be rats and rats. Ning Shu had to establish his prestige. He couldn't allow these self-righteous men to look down on him because of his status as a woman. He had to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. The chicken was precisely these Tatars. Ning Shu ignored the general's resentful gaze and walked onto the high platform. In a cold and loud voice, he said, "The Tatars hurt my compatriots. Kill. The Tatars trampled on my land. Kill, kill, kill." The soldiers below all raised their spears and shouted loudly. The dozen or so Tatars on the high platform were shaken and their faces turned pale. Especially when they saw Ning Shu coming over with a whip in her hand, they were scared out of their wits and started mumbling something that no one could understand. Ning Shu sneered and lashed out at the crotch of a Tatar. The Tatar, who had been tied up tightly, rolled his eyes in pain, his mouth emitting inhuman screams. The soldiers, who had been shouting their slogans with lofty aspirations, were so shocked that they lost their voices. For a moment, the drill ground filled with 200,000 soldiers was silent, all of them covering their crotches. Ning Shu sneered, "This is the price for humiliating my Great Yong's women." Ning Shu lashed out with the whip, continuously lashing out at the Tatar's crotch until it was dripping with blood and badly mangled flesh. Ning Shu surveyed the entire drill ground. Every man who was swept by Ning Shu's gaze felt their scalps tingle. They looked at Ning Shu as if they were looking at a demoness. Kai Sang stood below the platform, looking at Ning Shu, her eyes revealing an intoxicated expression. In the end, the dozen or so Tatars had their testicles popped by Ning Shu. They couldn't be more dead. Even Shen Feng, who had fought for half his life, had never seen anyone humiliate the enemy like Ning Shu. "Princess, that's enough. The army must pay attention to benevolence and righteousness. What is the difference between our Great Yong and the bloodthirsty northern desert?" Shen Feng asked Ning Shu. Ning Shu looked at Shen Feng, whose beard was somewhat white, and said, "Marshal, Jiehui does not agree with your words. Our benevolence and righteousness are seen as weak and easy to bully by our enemies. They will only look down on us even more. Only by using violence to curb violence and killing to stop killing can we intimidate our enemies. Since I can't reform you, I'll fucking cremate you." Shen Feng couldn't convince Ning Shu, and Ning Shu didn't agree with what Shen Feng said about benevolence and righteousness. Ning Shu beckoned to Kai Sang, who immediately ran in front of Ning Shu. Kai Sang asked, "Princess, what are your orders?" "Go and find some butchers." "Yes." Kai Sang went to find some butchers. Ning Shu directly ordered them to empty their stomachs. The butchers were immediately scared to the point of wetting their pants. They were butchers, not humans. Not only were the butchers scared to the point of wetting their pants, even the soldiers below felt their hair stand on end. Looking at the indifferent Ning Shu, they felt both admiration and fear. Finally, the butchers dissected the Tatars. Ning Shu had the bodies of the Tatars smeared with salt before hanging them at the city gate. In the dead of winter, it was the perfect time to make bacon. Ning Shu's actions intimidated everyone. Shen Feng looked at Ning Shu and shook his head. Ning Shu loudly declared, "This is the price for invading my great Yong." The rows of corpses hanging at the city gate allowed the bold and fearless Tatars to see that these people, who had been wantonly trampled upon by them, were still able to resist. For a long time, the corpses were hung on the city walls. After being exposed to the elements, the corpses became even stiffer, causing the Tatars passing by the city gate to tremble in fear. Such brutality! Ning Shu didn't pay attention to these people's fearful gazes. Afterwards, Princess Jia Hui's reputation as a demoness quietly spread. If they had any thoughts before, then now they wished they could arm themselves to the crotch of their pants. The sight of Princess Jia Hui's pants made them shiver. When Ning Shu returned to his tent, his entire body went limp and he nearly vomited. However, his body felt incomparably carefree. Ning Shu guessed that this was the original owner of his body. Princess Jia Hui hated the Tatars. During the marriage alliance, she had been humiliated by the Tatars. Now that she saw these people fall to such a state, she felt incomparably carefree. Ning Shu also smiled. To be able to do something for the original owner of his body was extremely good. Chapter 65. After this matter, Ning Shu had established absolute prestige in the army. Of course, they were afraid. Ning Shu expressed that he did not care. What surprised Ning Shu was that Kai Seng actually followed him to learn martial arts. Every day, other than washing clothes, cooking, and serving Ning Shu, she also took time to practice martial arts. She said that she wanted to go to the battlefield to kill enemies. Ning Shu also allowed her to do so. It was unknown whether it was because Ning Shu's reputation was too brutal, but there were many lonely and helpless women who had been defiled by the Tatars who ran over to seek refuge with Ning Shu. It did not take long for hundreds of people to gather. They had become a female army, adding a touch of color to the entire military camp. These women were all desperate and had no choice but to seek refuge with Ning Shu. Seeing Ning Shu say that he wanted to go to the battlefield to take revenge, they gnashed their teeth in anger. Ning Shu thought about it. It was very important to establish a team that he could command. Thus, he accepted these women and had people teach them the basics of martial arts. Perhaps it was because they had found a new goal in life. These women were no less vicious than the men. Perhaps women could not compare to men in terms of physical strength, but men could not compare to women in terms of tenacity. However, the military camp could not raise these women for nothing. Even Shen Feng vaguely said that women could not stay in the military camp. Ning Shu did not say anything. He only said that these women helped in the military camp. For example, cooking and sewing clothes were all done by these women. In the end, Shen Feng could only let Ning Shu do as he wished. With Ning Shu as a precedent, it was not easy to use the reason that women could not stay in the military camp. Ning Shu did not know that a wave of criticism had already been set off in the capital. It was nothing more than that his methods were too brutal. Another thing was that he had taken in so many women in the military camp, which touched the nerves of these pedantic scholars. If women could go to the battlefield, how could the 3 obedience and 4 virtues be used to restrain women in the future? It would not be good to add shackles to women's thoughts. The officials all rose up. Li Wen sat on the dragon throne. His face was expressionless, but a hint of a smile flashed in his eyes. He read the memorials from the border repeatedly. When he saw Ning Shu's actions, a hint of satisfaction flashed in his eyes. Then, he looked at the ministers below and said indifferently, "Yes, your methods are cruel. How about this, I will send one of you to the border. If you can come back alive, I will dismiss Princess Jihui. How about that?" The officials were speechless. The emperor wanted them to die. When facing these officials, Li Wen's attitude was always indifferent. If one of them died, someone would immediately replace him. Li Wen wished that these corrupt officials were all dead. The ministers shrunk their necks and lowered their presence. Not long after, Ning Shu received a letter from Li Wen. There were only 2 words written on it, "Very good." Ning Shu immediately understood Li Wen's meaning. It seemed that Li Wen approved of his actions. With Li Wen's support, Ning Shu's heart felt more at ease. Now, Ning Shu's tent had become a forbidden area for men and a base for women. The women wore armor and waved red tasseled spears. They actually looked decent. Ning Shu's lips curled into a smile. This could be considered as the power left for the original owner. He hoped that after she left this world, the original owner would be able to live a more relaxed life. Ning Shu was now walking on the majestic city wall. He looked at the Tatars' corpses on the wall. Looking up, he saw a vast grassland and snow mountains in the distance. It was such a magnificent scene. Ning Shu was followed by the armored Kai Sang. Ning Shu said, "Princess, the people of the northern desert have such a vast land. Why do they still want to steal our things? Stealing is addictive. It is easy to reap without sowing. Farming is not something the Tatars can do." Ning Shu said indifferently. Probably because Helianing was injured, there were no Tatars harassing the border recently. Ning Shu practiced martial arts every day and also thought of a way to deal with the Tatars' cavalry. The Tatars' cavalry was the most powerful. The horses and people were fat and strong. He had to think of a way to deal with the cavalry. If 100 people were exchanged for 1 Tatar from the northern desert, Ning Shu's heart would tremble. It was simply stacking human lives. There would be a way. Ning Shu wandered on the city wall and bumped into Duan Xinghui. Duan Xinghui walked up. Ning Shu cupped his fist and said, "Greetings, princess." Ning Shu grunted coldly and brushed past Duan Xinghui. Duan Xinghui saw that Princess Jihui did not even look at him. He could not help but say, "Princess Jihui, will you go with the second prince of the northern desert?" Ning Shu stopped and turned around to look at Duan Xinghui with a frown. "Guard Duan, this doesn't seem to have anything to do with you. Also, it's not up to you to question the relationship between me and Mo Bei's second prince. If you spread this kind of rumor in the army, be careful that I don't kill you." Duan Xinghui bowed slightly. Ning Shu said, "I will remember." Ning Shu snorted and returned to the camp with Kai Sang. The Tatars only focused on raiding. The infantry had no advantage over the cavalry. Snow fell from the sky like goose feathers. In less than a day, the snow covered everything. Shen Feng looked very dignified. Usually, in this kind of weather, even cattle and sheep would freeze to death. Now was the time for the Tatars to raid. They sent soldiers everywhere to scout and sent a lot of soldiers to guard. Ning Shu still did not think of a way to deal with the cavalry. The most effective method was to use crossbows to shoot the Tatars on horseback. Shen Feng was not young. He did not have much confidence in winning the battle. He only wanted to do meritorious service and not make any mistakes. However, Ning Shu wanted to deal a heavy blow to the Tatars. He suggested that Shen Feng put large crossbows on the city wall. Shen Feng nodded at Ning Shu's suggestion and went to arrange it. Duan Xinghui had been by Shen Feng's side. He was busy. Now that the battle was coming, Duan Xinghui could not help but comfort Ning Shu. "Princess, in fact, as long as we defend the city wall, we will win." Ning Shu was quite speechless. What did Duan Xinghui mean by saying this to her? Ning Shu was also preparing for the battle. "Princess, let us go with you this time." Ning Shu pleaded with Kai Sang. They all want to go with you. When Ning Shu came out of the tent, she saw the female army standing neatly in front of her. They weren't very beautiful, they didn't even have enchanting figures, but their aura couldn't even be compared to men. Their expression was solemn. When they saw Ning Shu, they knelt on one knee on the ground. Greetings General Zhu Qianfeng. Ning Shu was instantly filled with lofty sentiments. He shouted, "Get up! There will be a great battle soon. Are you afraid?" "Not afraid." The woman's voice was not as deep as the man's voice. Mixed together, it was very clear and moving. From now on, start training archery. Archery is about arm strength. To deal with the Tatars, crossbows are the best way. Start training now. Ning Shu pointed at the target. Shoot at the target. Ning Shu was the first to pull the bow and arrow. She directly shot at the target. Her strength was very big. She directly shot through the target. Chapter 66. Ning Shu hoped that these poor women who sought refuge with him could survive. At this time, they must train hard. Only then would they have a chance to survive on the battlefield. Sure enough, after the heavy snow stopped, Lianing led the Tatars to attack the city. Ning Shu stood on the city wall and met Lianying's eyes. Ning Shu was very angry. Why didn't this guy die? Was it because the poison was not deep enough? Didn't he vomit blood? Now he was alive and kicking. Lianing was wearing fur. His neck was furry. Obviously, he was wild and noble. He raised his head and looked at Ning Shu. Ning Shu smiled coldly. He waved his hand and ordered the soldiers to carry the ladders to attack the city. The war drums sounded. Ning Shu shouted coldly, "Release the arrows." Suddenly, a rain of arrows flew towards the Tatars. The Tatars who were attacking the city were hit by several arrows. Some of them even became hedgehogs. Shoot again. The soldiers who were shooting arrows at the back immediately replaced the soldiers in front. Ning Shu saw many women being hit by arrows from the corner of his eyes. Ning Shu's heart trembled. Then, he calmed his mind. Change to the catapults. This catapult should be considered a weapon with great destructive power in ancient times, especially when shot from a high place. Some of the Tatars climbed up the city wall with great difficulty. However, they were hit by ice and fell down from the ladders. They could not move. Lianing looked at the snow-covered objects on the city wall. He had a guess in his heart. He suddenly looked at Ning Shu. Ning Shu smiled. Yes, it is as you think. These are the corpses of the Tatars. The Tatars hanging on the city wall revealed their dark eye sockets. The eyeballs inside were already gone. They were pecked away by birds. Either do not do it, or do it to the extreme. Lianying's complexion suddenly became very unsightly. She looked at Ning Shu with eyes that carried dense killing intent and treacherous entanglement. Her expression was incomparably dangerous. Ning Shu stretched out his hand and handed her a crossbow. Ning Shu pointed the arrowhead at Lianing. Lianing sneered at Ning Shu from a distance and pointed her bow at Ning Shu. Whoosh, whoosh, the two arrows whizzed through the air, even creating tiny sparks in the air. Ning Shu's pupils dilated as she looked at the arrow flying towards her. Ning Shu tilted her head, but the arrowhead still grazed her face. The wound was very small. "Princess, are you all right?" When Duan Xinghui saw this scene, he was so scared that his heart almost stopped. He finished off the Tatars who had already climbed up the wall with one slash and Ning Shu ran over. Ning Shu smiled evilly as he wiped the blood off his face. He even stuck out his tongue and licked the blood on his fingertips. He did not pay attention to Mu Jinyu, but looked closely at Lianing. Duan Xinghui looked at Princess Jia Hui, who had an evil smile on her face and only felt his heart beating violently in his chest. The current Princess Jia Hui was incomparably charming. The bloodstains on her face even added a cruel and fatal beauty to her. Looking at Lianing sitting on the horse, Ning Shu was disappointed, but it was still within his expectations. If Lianing died so easily, Ning Shu would simply burn incense to the high heavens. In the end, the Tatars did not succeed in this siege. When the Tatars fled, their formation was scattered and panicked like fish that escaped the net. Ning Shu grabbed Lianing from a distance and then kissed her lips. Then, she turned her horse around and ran away. Ning Shu pursed his lips. This was the most annoying thing about the Tatars. If they could not win, they would run away. Fighting with them required a lot of energy. Ning Shu was very angry. He pulled his bow into the shape of a full moon and the arrowhead rushed towards Lianying's back. Princess, Lianying is very crafty. He is deliberately running away. If Princess chases after him, you will fall into his trap. Cavalry is suitable for fighting on the plains. Duan Xinghui looked at Ning Shu's unwilling expression and could not help but persuade him. You are a precedent for failure. I will not foolishly chase after you. Ning Shu said to Duan Xinghui. Then, he shouted loudly, clean up the dead soldiers and register them. Duan Xinghui was speechless. Duan Xinghui felt that his good intentions were treated as ill intent. Furthermore, Princess Jia Hui tore open his wounds like this, making him feel embarrassed and a little sad. Right now, Princess Jia Hui completely regarded him as an enemy. It was not appropriate to call him an enemy. He had no power or influence. She had never considered his feelings when she spoke. What made Ning Shu sad was that half of the more than 100 women were now dead. Yesterday, they were still alive. Today, they had become corpses. There was not even anyone to collect their corpses. Ning Shu asked Kai Sang to bury these corpses and register their names. They were women, but they were also heroes. They should not be deprived of the praise they deserved because of their identity. They should be left in the history books. The expressions of the surviving women became more determined. Even though their faces were very pale now, their eyes were very determined. In the following time, the Tatars seemed to be tireless in attacking the city. Ning Shu could even see that Lianying's face was anxious. It was probably because of the heavy snow and the army did not have any provisions. Also, the winter provisions of the entire northern desert were obtained by plundering. Now, they could not even break through the city wall. Lianing looked at Ning Shu who was standing on the city wall. This year, because of this princess, they would not let them in even if they died. In the past, the guards would symbolically guard the city. Then, when they were defeated, they would let them in to plunder and then return to the northern desert. Princess Jiehui, Li Xueshan, this woman, Ning Shu also felt a lot better in his heart. He looked almost numbly at the soldiers being carried away. However, so many people had already died. They could not give up. If they compromised this time, then there would be a next time, and a next time. Would these people die in vain? There was another more important reason. That was, if they lost, these hateful Tatars would enter the hinterland and plunder everything. At that time, the northern desert would propose a marriage alliance, which would also disappoint Li Wen. Therefore, they had to hold on. During this period, because Duan Xinghui had made a lot of contributions, he was directly promoted to the right vanguard by Shen Feng. He was almost on the same level as Ning Shu. He was indeed the world's favorite. With luck on his body, he was like a fish in water in this kind of war. How lucky was he? Ning Shu clearly saw the arrow whistling towards Duan Xinghui, but the one who was shot was the soldier beside Duan Xinghui. Ning Shu was speechless at that time. He did not know what Shen Feng liked about Duan Xinghui. Shen Feng praised him so much that Duan Xinghui, who was still a soldier, became the third person in the military camp. Now, Duan Xinghui was qualified to command the battlefield. He stood beside Ning Shu and looked at Lianing with gnashing teeth. Ning Shu's nerves had been tense all this time. Especially when he saw that her female troops had casualties, Ning Shu's heart ached. However, as time went by, the casualties were getting smaller and smaller. These women's bodies were full of valiant chi. They were not worse than men. These remaining were all good seedlings. Helianing retreated again. Before she retreated, she looked at Ning Shu with cruel and excited eyes. This made Duan Xinghui, who was standing beside Ning Shu, feel very uncomfortable. Chapter 67. Helianing seemed to be at odds with Ning Shu. Other than when it was snowing or raining, he would attack the city. It was as if he was doing the 8th set of radio calisthenics. However, blood flowed like a river. Ning Shu simply wanted to curse. He stood on the city wall and looked down at that bastard Helianing. This battle was all about money and food. Just a day's worth of food was a terrifying number. He didn't know how long he could last. Moreover, Ning Shu looked at Grand Marshal Shen Feng's attitude. It seemed that he didn't want to persist. However, if he didn't persist, so many lives and so much investment would be wasted. He could only drag it on like this. Ning Shu received another letter from Li Wen. It was a private letter for him. Li Wen's meaning in the letter was very clear. Although he hoped that Ning Shu could win the battle, he hoped that Ning Shu could persist and have a strong attitude. At the end of the letter, there were some words of concern. It sounded a little like an elder brother. As for how much sincerity there was, Ning Shu didn't want to delve into it. As an emperor, every action and every word had a deep meaning. Today, the weather was very good. After a day of wind and snow, the ground was covered with a thick layer of snow. Ning Shu originally thought that with such bad weather, it would be difficult to even walk and that Helianing wouldn't attack the city. He didn't expect that he would still attack the city. Moreover, the Tatars' faces were filled with anxiety and desperation. It was now late winter. However, there was no harvest this year. Even the calm Helianing frowned. His expression was very cold. He raised his head and squinted at Ning Shu, who was standing beside the flag. The bright and beautiful sun shone on her body. Her armor emitted a cold light. It was so dazzling that even Princess Jia Hui's face couldn't be seen clearly. Duan Xinghui stood beside Ning Shu. Seeing that Helianing kept looking at Princess Jia, he felt very uncomfortable. He couldn't help but say to Ning Shu, "Princess, the Tatars of the northern desert are ambitious. Princess, you must not compromise." Ning Shu couldn't help but want to dig out her earwax. She basically heard these words every day. It seemed that Duan Xinghui was a man of few words. In front of the original Princess Jia, he always had the appearance of a cool brother. Now that he was nagging, it was really annoying. Helianing pursed her lips and looked at the couple on the city wall. She couldn't help but shoot at Duan Xinghui with her bow and arrow. She didn't know if it was because of the strong wind today, but the arrow that was flying towards Duan Xinghui was actually shot towards Ning Shu. Ning Shu, as expected, the unlucky ones who stayed with Nan Zhujun would always be cannon fodder. Ning Shu wanted to dodge, but her body suddenly lost control, and her soul seemed to be ejected out of her body. Ning Shu was shocked. What was going on? Why did she suddenly lose control of her body? Duan Xinghui saw the arrow speeding towards Princess Jia. Furthermore, Princess Jia still had a blank expression, not knowing how to dodge. Panic surged in Duan Xinghui's heart. He hurriedly used his saber to slash at the arrow. However, the arrowhead still shot towards Ning Shu. The arrowhead lost its aim and pierced into Ning Shu's shoulder. Ning Shu groaned. The sound of the arrowhead piercing through flesh rang out in her ears. Immediately after, an earth-shattering pain engulfed her entire brain. Damn, it's so painful. Ding. Counterattack mission completed. Do you wish to leave this world? A cold mechanical voice sounded out in Ning Shu's mind. Yes, yes, yes. Ning Shu only wanted to quickly leave this world. It was too painful. Even if she wanted to leave this world, she didn't have to stab herself with an arrow. The system tricked me. In an instant, Ning Shu's soul left Princess Jiahui's body. Everything happened too quickly. By the time everyone reacted, they realized that a great Yong commander had been killed. The northern desert Tatars beat their chests and cheered, their morale soaring. They looked at their second prince, Helianing, with gazes of worship and reverence. As for Helianing, who was viewed as a hero, he tightly gripped his bow, trembling slightly. His face was pale and his eyes trembled. She could have clearly dodged. With her strength, she shouldn't have been unable to dodge this arrow. Furthermore, the person he wanted to kill wasn't her. Helianing raised his hand and loudly shouted, "Beat the gongs and retreat." This, now was clearly the best time to attack the city. Why did they have to retreat? Second prince, right now is the time when Great Yong's morale is at its lowest. Attacking the city now is twice the result with half the effort. Why do we have to retreat? A Tatar commander asked Helianing. Slap. Helianing slapped the commander's face. Gnashing his teeth, he said, "This prince said to retreat, so we will retreat." Helianing turned his horse around and glanced back at Princess Jiahui's position. There was no one there. In a daze, he saw a pair of clear and cold eyes, aloof yet filled with disdain and craftiness. She shouldn't die so easily. Carrying Princess Jiahui, Duan Xinghui rushed to the military doctor's tent and loudly shouted, "Save her, quickly save her." Duan Xinghui waited outside the tent, anxiously pacing back and forth. Right now, Duan Xinghui was anxious, fearful, and terrified. He also had an intense desire to not let Princess Jiahui die. However, when he thought that this woman who looked down on him would die, Duan Xinghui's heart felt like it was in a pot of oil. When the arrow was pulled out, Princess Jiahui let out a muffled groan. She opened her eyes slightly and looked at the simple and crude tent. How was she still alive? She was still in the Tatar tent of the northern desert. Pain assaulted her, and Princess Jiahui fainted. Seeing that Princess Jiahui was fine, everyone in the military camp breathed a sigh of relief, especially Shin Feng. Although swords and sabers had no eyes on the battlefield, the death of a country's princess, who was of the same mother as the emperor, didn't matter how many meritorious deeds he had performed. The emperor wouldn't care. However, Princess Jiahui felt as if she was in a dream. She didn't know if she had seen her previous life before being shot by the arrow, or if the current situation was just a dream. Looking at the women kneeling before her, their expressions were solemn and respectful. When they saw her, their eyes were bloodshot. Touching the whip in her eye, Princess Jiahui smiled. No matter what, she was no longer as miserable as she was in her dream. She wasn't humiliated by others, and she wasn't in the pain of living in the ceaseless pain. She didn't disappoint her imperial brother. She was the most honorable princess of the great Yong dynasty. When she saw Duan Xinghui, Princess Jiahui smiled. This man, whom she had loved so much in her dream, was currently looking at her with a worried expression. So what if she was a woman? Women weren't necessarily inferior to men. She was willing to remain unmarried for the rest of her life and fight for her imperial brother for the rest of her life. No matter how painful it was, it couldn't compare to being shared by many men, eating pig's food, living a life that was neither human nor ghost, living without dignity, not knowing why she lived. Even if it was like a dream, this dream was so real. "Princess, are you all right?" Finally, Duan Xinghui stepped forward and asked. Under the princess' meaningful and strange gaze, he asked Princess Jiahui. Princess Jiahui stared blankly for a moment. It seemed that she hadn't heard Duan Xinghui's voice for a long time. Chapter 68. As if to ascertain whether Princess Jiahui was truly all right, Helianing soon arrived to attack the city. Seeing Princess Jihui standing on the city walls, he laughed. He Lianing laughed. She laughed very happily. Princess Jihui looked at He Lianing. This man, this demon-like man, could actually laugh like this. A cruel and treacherous man would never laugh like this. What was he laughing about? Could it be that seeing that she had not died, he was so disappointed that he had lost his mind? Princess Jihui touched the whip at her waist, coldly snorting, "Shoot the arrows." Duan Xinghui looked at her. The current Princess Jihui was even more noble and proud, as if she had been reborn. The current Princess Jihui did not have her previous cold demeanor, appearing even more luxurious. As she pursed her lips, her temperament became different. Duan Xinghui was confused by the ever-changing Princess Jihui. Previously, Princess Jihui had looked at him with extreme coldness. When she looked at him, it was as if she knew his secret thoughts, her eyes filled with mockery and disdain. The current Princess Jihui looked at him with treacherous eyes, with a hint of rejoicing and even more relief. Immediately after, she looked at him as if he was a stranger. Duan Xinghui was speechless. Duan Xinghui felt as if his heart was being torn apart. Looking at Princess Jihui's back, he felt as if he had lost something important. His heart suddenly felt empty, so empty that it was unbearable. This battle continued until the beginning of spring. When the snow melted, He Lianing led the remaining soldiers back to the grasslands. Before leaving, he looked at Princess Jihui with a treacherous gaze. Princess Jihui sneered. She was no longer the pitiful woman in her dreams. She would forever be Great Yong's most noble Princess Jihui. After returning to court, when she saw Li Wen, tears welled up in Princess Jihui's eyes. In this world, only she and her imperial brother were family. Li Wen looked at Princess Jihui with gratification. After a while, he said, "You've changed again." Ah. Princess Jihui did not understand. Li Wen decreed that Princess Jihui could be buried in the imperial mausoleum 100 years later and enjoy the pleasures of the world. This was an enormous honor. No other princess had ever received such honor. Although the princess was the emperor's younger sister, she was still a woman. After marrying, she would belong to another family. This kind of honor caused all the court officials to grumble. Li Wen didn't say anything and directly sent the ministers who strongly opposed to the idea to the border to guard it. He enjoyed the bustling life in the capital, and it was easy for him to talk. He also went to the border to guard it. Next, it was time to award Duan Xinghui according to his contributions. Li Wen looked at Princess Jihui. Princess Jihui said indifferently, "Just award him according to his contributions." Royal brother, you don't have to worry about me. When Duan Xinghui learned that he had been promoted to level 2 Agile Cavalry General, he felt very complicated. Looking at Princess Jihui who was sitting in front of the palace, Duan Xinghui felt even more complicated. Duan Xinghui returned to the Duan residence at the speed of a tortoise. He did not feel the slightest bit of urgency in his heart. His mood was abnormally heavy. It was undeniable that he was very regretful. The gate of the Duan mansion was unusually lively. Duan Xinghui, dressed in armor, returned in glory. Madame Duan looked at her son and cried tears of joy. She said with heartache that he had become darker and thinner. Duan Xinghui's eyes swept over Yuan Dong and finally rested on Arya. She was wearing a lake blue silk dress with a hairpin in her hair. She looked happy and showed her teeth. But then she realized that it was inappropriate and quickly pursed her lips. Arya quickly showed Duan Xinghui a smile without showing her teeth. But she didn't know that such a smile made her look very timid and even self-abased. In just one winter, Arya no longer had the freedom, simplicity, and beauty that Duan Xinghui saw. Now Arya's every move was so awkward, like a puppet. Duan Xinghui saw the smile on her face, and the face of Princess Jihui appeared in his mind. She could even stick out her tongue to lick the blood at the corner of her mouth. She looked evil and charming, which was breathtaking. Arya was very excited that Duan Xinghui married her. At the banquet, Duan Xinghui drank a lot and even shed tears. Maybe he was mourning, or maybe he was regretting. Duan Xinghui and Arya's life was not so good. Duan Xinghui gave Arya the position of his wife, but he didn't fulfill the promise of being with her for the rest of his life. He had other women around him. Without Princess Jiehui, Duan Xinghui didn't care about other women or how many women he had. There was no happiness in his life. Arya was not reconciled, but she had to endure it. She had to endure the man rolling with other women. Her heart was full of holes. Right now, Princess Jiehui had become the bright moonlight in Duan Xinghui's heart. What he couldn't obtain was the best. Duan Xinghui would never be able to obtain Princess Jiehui in this lifetime. Princess Jiehui had become a celestial concubine. After the war, an envoy from the northern desert came and said that they were willing to sign a treaty of non-aggression for 100 years. But there was one condition, which was to let Princess Jiehui marry the second prince of the northern desert, Helianing. Princess Jiehui smiled. She would rather die than enter the northern desert. This time, before Princess Jiehui said anything, Li Wen objected. After the envoy from the northern desert left, Princess Jiehui told Li Wen that she was willing to guard the border. She was even willing to stay unmarried for the rest of her life to resist the Tatars of the northern desert. Princess Jiehui said frankly that no man in this world was worthy of her. Li Wen joked, "If you meet a man as excellent as my royal brother, you won't marry him?" Princess Jiehui smiled, "There is only one person like my royal brother in this world. There is no other." Duan Xinghui was in the hall when he heard Princess Jiehui say this. He remembered that Princess Jiehui said a long time ago that he was the best man in the world. Now, Princess Jiehui couldn't see his figure in her eyes. Princess Jiehui traveled through the night and returned to the border. Leading her female soldiers, she patrolled the city walls. She saw a row of Tatars' corpses hanging on the city walls. Without the ice and snow covering them, the Tatars' corpses revealed their original appearance. They revealed sinister and painful expressions as they turned into dried corpses. Kai Sang said to Princess Jiehui, "Now, the Tatars don't dare to look at these corpses. The Tatars who come to the city to trade don't dare to be arrogant. The commoners here all call the princess the goddess of war. They even say that they want to erect a plaque and statue of the goddess of war." Princess Jiehui smiled and didn't say anything. However, not long after, an enormous stone statue was erected in the city. It was a statue of Princess Jiehui dressed in armor. Her hair was raised high and swayed in the wind. Her eyes were proud and noble, and a whip hung from her waist. Looking at this enormous statue, tears streamed down Princess Jiehui's face. She was Great Yong's noble princess, the revered Princess Jiehui, not a filthy princess. Chapter 69. When Ning Shu returned to the system space, she couldn't help but touch her shoulder. Even now, she still felt pain. After being a normal person for so long, Ning Shu hadn't been in so much pain for a long time. Only when undergoing chemotherapy would it be so painful. Ning Shu almost forgot that she was once a patient. Looking down at her body, Ning Shu sighed. Her soul dimmed a little. She quickly sat down and absorbed the energy of the system space. Ning Shu thought of the peerless martial art. She simply followed the route of the peerless martial art. This speed was too slow. Ning Shu thought of the peerless martial arts mental cultivation method. She didn't know if it would work. She was now a soul. Without a body or meridians, how could she use the mental cultivation method? She felt drunk. Ning Shu sat on the ground with her eyes closed. She didn't know what material it was, but what made Ning Shu surprised was that the speed was faster. Moreover, the material felt very comfortable when it was introduced into her soul. It was a cool feeling. Ning Shu was in the middle of doing it when a cold mechanical voice sounded in the system space. "Congratulations player for returning. Do you want to see the information page now?" "Yes, Ning Shu had just answered when a screen appeared in front of her. On it was her information. Number, 23333 Name, Ning Shu Age, 27 Experience, 7100, 7000/10,000, Soul, 60 HP, 50 Wisdom, 80 Charm, 1 Luck, 25 Mental Strength, 120 Martial Strength, 10 Aptitude, 24 Merit, 2 Skills, 5th Ring Spear Technique, Trash Fighting Technique, Beginner Peerless Martial Art Honorary Title. Goddess of War. Ning Shu saw the title Goddess of War and was stunned. When did she have such a title? And it was a goddess? Forget it, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that she only had 3,000 points this time. Including the peerless martial art she had exchanged for, she only had a total of 7,100 points. There were also 2 merit points that she didn't know what to do with. She fought a bloody battle. She didn't know if the blood on her body was her menstrual blood or the blood of her enemies. In the end, she only got these few points. Alright, it was already good enough to have points. Being able to come back alive was already good enough. You've obtained 5 additional attribute points. Where do you want to add them? The space system asked. Ning Shu clicked on the screen. First, she clicked on the luck stat. Moreover, she was filled with grief and indignation. She realized that her luck was really bad. She was about to leave this world, but she still got shot by an arrow. It was so painful. After Ning Shu finished distributing the attributes, the screen changed. Serial number, 23333 Name, Ning Shu Age, 27 EXP, 7100, 7000/10,000, Soul Value, 60 HP, 50 Wisdom, 80 Charm, 1 Luck, 25, plus 3, Spiritual Power, 120 Combat Power, 10 Aptitude, 24, plus 2, Merit, 2 Skills, 5th Ring Spear Technique, Trash Fighting Technique, Trash Entry-Level Peerless Martial Arts. Honorary Title, Goddess of War. Do you want to enter the mission world? The mechanical voice of the system sounded. Ning Shu shook her head. I'll enter the world later. Her soul had been consumed by the previous world and had already become dim. Moreover, she had experienced slaughter in the previous world. She had changed from a good citizen to a general with blood-stained hands. She had to settle her emotions. If she didn't continue like this, she would go crazy. Ning Shu emptied her thoughts. She was only herself. She was Ning Shu. No matter what she had experienced, she was still herself. She might have lived for others, but she was still Ning Shu. Ning Shu didn't realize that her soul had become heavier. Her expression was relaxed and her eyes were closed. She seemed to be enjoying it. After an unknown amount of time, Ning Shu opened her eyes and looked down at her body. She felt that her soul was much more solid than before. She had to get enough points to get some secret cultivation manuals. Only then could she cultivate more effectively. I'm ready. I can enter the world. Ning Shu said. As soon as she said that, Ning Shu immediately felt dizzy. Fuck, it's always like this. Will it kill you to remind me? I'll give the system a bad review and scram. Perhaps it was because her soul had become stronger, Ning Shu didn't feel as uncomfortable as before when she was conscious. Instead, there were noises in her ears. You're an adult. Why are you being so calculative with a child? A cold and clear voice said. Besides, Dabao didn't do it on purpose. Why are you acting like this? Su Ran, look at yourself. Son-in-law, you're wrong to say that. Ran, just lost her child. It's all because of that little bitch Su Meng's child. How can that child be justified in pushing someone? A sorrowful female voice sounded. At this moment, the male voice sounded angry. I don't want to hear anything bad about Su Meng from your mouth. You, Ning Shu heard these words and struggled to open her eyes. Ran, you're awake. A woman looked at Ning Shu with concern. Her eyes were filled with tears. Ning Shu nodded and moved his body. Then, he felt waves down there. His stomach hurt as if a knife was scraping it. Ning Shu was stunned. What was going on? Don't move. Don't move if you're not feeling well. The woman pressed down on Ning Shu's body. Ning Shu looked around. The smell of disinfectant lingered around his nose. It seemed like he was in a hospital. His eyes stopped not far from the bed. Ning Shu saw a man in a black suit. He was tall and straight. The suit looked very sexy on him. His expression was cold and handsome. He was in a black and white suit. His facial features were clear and handsome. His expression and eyes were cold. His entire body was filled with a domineering and handsome aura. He was a very charming man. But now, this man was staring at him with an unfriendly gaze. It was mixed with extreme disgust. It was as if he was some kind of enemy. Ning Shu blinked. She hadn't received the plot yet and didn't know what was going on. So, she kept quiet. The man looked at Ning Shu's pretentious attitude and sneered. He picked up the jacket on the sofa and left. The man's attitude made the woman who was comforting Ning Shu very angry. She looked at the man's back and was so angry that her body trembled. Then, she turned her head and looked at Ning Shu. She said sadly, "Ran air, my daughter." Ning Shu was very uncomfortable. Her stomach hurt. It couldn't be what she was thinking, right? "I'm tired," Ning Shu said. She had to accept the plot first. Then rest well. You're in confinement. Don't think too much. Rest well and we'll talk about other things, Mrs. Su said to Ning Shu. Ning Shu was dumbfounded. No wonder her stomach hurt so much. She had a miscarriage. She was an unmarried woman, yet she had skipped so many procedures. Now she had to go through a miscarriage and give birth to a child. Mrs. Su saw her daughter's strange expression and thought she was sad about the child. She quickly said, "Mom won't talk about it. Rest well." Mrs. Su wiped her tears. "Mom will go back and make chicken soup for you." Chapter 70. After Mrs. Su left, Ning Shu endured the discomfort in his stomach and flipped over. Then, the lochia burst out. Ning Shu felt that life was full of evil. Why was it that every time she entered the world, she would either be beaten to death or starved to death? Now, she had a miscarriage. She decided to add all her attribute points to her luck. Was her luck really that bad? What a scam. Ning Shu closed his eyes and began to accept the plot. However, this plot made Ning Shu feel like he was suffering from menstrual cramps and pain in the balls. This plot was very simple. It was a story of sleeping in the wrong bed, running away with the balls, and finally a happy family. Ning Shu's body was called Su Ran. She was the female lead, Su Meng's cousin, but they were rivals in love. At the beginning of the plot, Su Meng's parents died in a car accident. Moreover, this accident seemed to be a plot by this body's parents. One had to know that the fights between rich families were always so tragic. At the funeral, Su Meng accused her uncle of being the murderer of her parents. However, there was no evidence. Su Meng, who was depressed and in pain, ran to the bar to drink. She thought about how her beloved parents had left her and she was an orphan. However, she couldn't take revenge. Su Meng drank more and more. In the end, she was spotted by a young man in the bar. Su Meng grew up in a rich family. She knew this man's intention. However, her body was weak and she was brought to a hotel by the young man. Su Meng took the opportunity to escape into a room. This room was Nan Zhujuan's room. Please don't ask why the male lead was in this room. Also, please don't ask why Nan Zhujun didn't stay in her own villa and insisted on staying in a hotel. Ning Shu didn't know either. Things were just so coincidental. After tearing at each other for a while, the two of them finally slept together. Lightning struck the earth, causing the earth to shake and the mountains to shake. When Nan Zhujun woke up the next morning, Xiao Yan saw that there was no one beside him. However, there was a note beside the bed with 1,000 yuan. It said that it was for him to spend the night. Xiao Yan was furious. He already had a physiological reaction in the morning. Looking at the money and the words on the note, Nan Zhujun almost shot out of anger. Then he swore to find that hateful woman, blah, blah. Don't ask why a person with a hangover would wake up earlier than a normal person. Ning Shu could only say that perhaps Xiao Yan was too tired and used up too much energy. Speaking of which, Su Meng acted as if she was suffering from paranoia. She felt that her uncle was going to get rid of her, so she quickly bought a plane ticket and left the country. Then, Xiao Yan, who was in the country, almost turned the ground upside down, but he still couldn't find that woman. Su Meng, who was overseas, found out that she was pregnant. Thinking that she had no relatives, and that this child was a gift from God, Su Meng decided to give birth to it. Then, she was very lucky and gave birth to a pair of twins. These two children were very cute, had high IQ, and could earn money. They were so sensible and well-behaved that they didn't seem like children. As the eldest brother, not only did he have to take care of his younger sister, he also had to take care of his adorable mother sometimes. Xiao Yan couldn't find Su Meng, so he followed his parents' advice and married Su Ran, who was Su Meng's cousin. 7 years later, Su Meng returned to China and returned to her hometown with the two children. Under the influence of Su Debao, Xiao Yan and Su Meng met. Xiao Yan recognized this woman at a glance, and when he saw the two children beside her, his heart beat even more fiercely. Su Meng, however, knew that this man had become her cousin-in-law, and she was even more disdainful of Xiao Yan. Even if she was a single mother, there were many pursuers around her, and there were even men waiting silently by her side. When the original owner learned that her husband had such a big illegitimate child with her cousin, she felt bad. She and Xiao Yan had been married for almost 5 years, but they still didn't have any children. The relationship between the older generation was not good, and the relationship between Su Meng and Su Ran was even worse. Now, Su Meng was obviously going to steal her husband, especially when Su Meng had an expression of, "I don't like your husband, take care of your husband," which made Su Ran hate her even more. Since she looked down on him, why did she always flirt with him? Xiao Yan, on the other hand, was deeply in love with Su Meng, and they had a pair of lovely children. This pair of children made the whole Xiao family obedient, especially the two elders of the Xiao family. The original owner, Su Ran, had been married for so many years without children, so she treated the two children very well. Not long ago, Su Ran found out that she was 2 months pregnant, which almost made Su Ran cry with joy. But not long after, she was pushed down the stairs by Debao, who was 6 years old. Su Ran was lying in a pool of blood. She heard Debao naughtily say that he didn't do it on purpose. This ant wanted to push him, and he let her go, and then the ant fell down the stairs. Xiao Yan actually said that this was what he should do, and that his son was very smart. The pain in her body couldn't be compared to the pain in her heart. How was this a cute baby? This was simply a naughty child with the naivety and cruelty of a child. How could such a smart Debao not understand the consequences? He could make money, had a high IQ, and was also a top hacker. The male lead should be Debao, who was simply a cheat. After Ning Shu accepted the plot, he felt that his whole person was not very good. What kind of world was this? The 3 views of the world were so wrong. Out of wedlock, a mistress got married, and in the end, they still lived happily together. The 3 views of the world were all shocked. The original owner's wishes were, 1. Protect the Su family and not let the Xiao family annex the Su family. 2. she would rather die than divorce, so that Su Meng would be an illegitimate mistress for the rest of her life, and let the two vicious children be lowly illegitimate children forever. Since everyone said that she was vicious, she would be vicious to the end. Her character was quite unyielding. She would go down this path to the end, which was completely the rhythm of the evil. It was not long after being pushed down the stairs by De Bao and sent to the hospital. When Ning Shu just woke up, the person talking to the original owner's mother, Mrs. Su, was Xiao Yan. He was quite good-looking, but his attitude towards his wife was not so good. Ning Shu was more fortunate that she didn't have to sleep with Xiao Yan now. Ning Shu reckoned that Xiao Yan's face would be full of disgust. In fact, even if he wanted to get lost, Xiao Yan still had to stay chaste for Su Meng. If he wanted to sleep with someone, he had to sleep with the female lead, Su Meng. This time, Su Meng was very unhappy that Su Ran was pregnant. 2 months pregnant meant that after she came back, Xiao Yan still slept with the vicious Su Ran, which made Su Meng very disgusted. Because of this, in the ward just now, Xiao Yan was extremely disgusted with Su Ran. He almost directly said that she deserved it. It seemed that he didn't expect that Su Ran was also pregnant with his child. It was so cold. Love was originally beautiful, but based on the premise of destroying others, this kind of love was really disgusting. Chapter 71. Ning Shu began her miserable confinement. She couldn't take a shower or wash her hair. Mrs. Su didn't even want Ning Shu to brush her teeth, but Ning Shu couldn't stand it. No one from the Xiao family came to visit her while she was in the hospital. She was the young mistress of the Xiao family, wasn't she? But she felt like the original Su Ran was invisible. She didn't even have a sense of existence. If they didn't divorce, wouldn't it be better for them to live their own lives? What was the point? If this went on, Xiao Yan would definitely turn her into a deceased wife and marry Su Meng into the family. Thinking of the original Su Ran's fate, she could only say that she didn't seek death. She died miserably when she fought with the male and female lead. Mrs. Su was very unhappy that the Xiao family neglected her daughter. She took care of her daughter in the hospital without any clothes on. Ning Shu was a little touched. She should have seen how many people cared about her. Why did she have to spend her energy on a man who didn't want her? Mrs. Su looked at her daughter with a worried expression. She was careful in everything she did because she was afraid of touching her daughter's pain. Ning Shu didn't like the hospital at all. When she was alive, she spent 365 days a year in the hospital, so she felt disgusted staying in the hospital now. Ning Shu's confinement was almost over, but Xiao Yan didn't even come to visit her. He was so cold. She was his wife, wasn't he? It was as if he couldn't express his love for the female lead without being cruel to another woman. What an idiot. Ning Shu thought she would have a more leisurely confinement. When she was about to leave the hospital, she saw the female lead, Su Meng, come to visit her. Su Meng came to visit her. Ning Shu lay on the bed and looked at Su Meng. Su Meng was petite, and her soft hair was slightly curly. Coupled with her small, round face, she didn't look like a mother of a 6-year-old child at all. She was very delicate. Ning Shu wiped the feces from the corner of her eyes and rubbed it on Su Meng, who was standing beside the bed. Su Meng suddenly felt like she was struck by lightning. Her mouth twitched, and she quickly put the bouquet on the bed, away from Ning Shu. Su Meng didn't say anything, and neither did Ning Shu. Mrs. Su looked at Su Meng with a sharp gaze, her eyes filled with undisguised disgust. It was obvious that she hated this niece of hers to the core. Su Meng ignored Mrs. Su's gaze. Su Meng clearly knew that although they were relatives, they were also enemies. Her parents had lost their lives because of her uncle's family. Her parents had never thought of competing with her uncle for anything, so why would they not let them off? Ning Shu lay on the bed and watched Su Meng's expression change. One moment it was resentful, the next moment it was melancholy, and the next moment it was hatred. In short, her expression was too complicated to describe. Ning Shu asked, "Why are you looking for me?" Su Meng looked at the woman lying on the bed with a complicated expression and said, "De Bao told me about you falling from downstairs. He wasn't careful." Ning Shu was speechless. Was she here to poke at her heart? Ning Shu pursed his lips and looked at Su Meng. Su Meng continued, "I'm very sorry for what happened. This is retribution." Retribution? Ning Shu sneered, "Why don't you tell me what kind of retribution it is? I'm afraid the retribution will be even greater for strangling a child who hasn't even seen the world. Everyone knows exactly what is going on. Now, you're running over to me to talk about retribution. This consort. Bah, what retribution?" Su Meng was frightened by Ning Shu's expression. She only felt that the person in front of her was incomparably fierce. Su Meng's heart surged with anger. She said coldly, "If you don't want anyone to know, don't do it in the first place. What kind of heinous things did your family do? Is that why your child didn't want you to be his mother and left you like this? Su Meng, you're not a good person either. What right do you have to talk about my daughter like that? Shameless bitch, you climbed into a man's bed and gave birth to his child. If I were you, I would have jumped off a building long ago. Don't you feel shame for being so thick-skinned?" Mrs. Su bombarded Su Meng indiscriminately. Su Meng took a few steps back after being scolded by Mrs. Su. She raised her chin and said, "You people will get retribution one day." Ning Shu laughed and said to Su Meng, "What retribution will I get? You stole someone else's husband, destroyed someone else's family, and are a mistress that everyone hates. Your child is an illegitimate child and can't be registered. You should be the one getting retribution." Ning Shu realized that Su Meng's words and actions were quite naive. Of course, the female lead had the right to be naive and muddle-headed. Men loved her. How muddle-headed was Su Meng? Here's an example. "President Xiao Yan, woman, you stepped on my foot." Su Meng, sorry. President Xiao Yan, woman, you stepped on my left foot." She didn't know anything and decided the truth based on her own subjective feelings. No one else could be so willful other than the female lead. As for the death of Su Meng's parents, Ning Shu knew from the plot that the father of this body wanted to kill them, but they died in advance. Even the father of this body was shocked when he heard the news. He just wanted to kill them, but they died in the end. They were rushing to their deaths. Then, the female lead believed that her uncle's family killed her parents, and they had the motive and intention to do so. Ning Shu sighed. He felt that the death of the female lead's parents was all for Su Meng's beauty. Did she meet the one she was destined to meet? Canon Fodder was so miserable. When Su Meng heard Ning Shu accuse her of being a mistress, she was so angry that tears welled up in her almond-shaped eyes. She said angrily, "I'm not a mistress. I don't like your husband. You're the husband who came to me. I, Su Meng, don't want a man who has been used by others." Shrugging her shoulders, Ning Shu looked at Xiao Yan, who was standing at the door with an unsightly expression. Taking pleasure in Xiao Yan's misfortune, Ning Shu said to Xiao Yan, "Your true love said that you're a man that I've used before, and she doesn't want you." Su Meng turned and saw the tall and handsome Xiao Yan. Seeing his cold expression, Su Meng's heart trembled. She turned and pointed at Ning Shu and said angrily, "You're deliberately tricking me." Ning Shu said that she didn't need to trick him. Xiao Yan looked heartbroken and walked to Su Meng. Su Meng snorted and turned to leave the room, but Xiao Yan grabbed her arm. Su Meng struggled and shouted, "Go and grab your wife's hand." "Why are you grabbing me? Let me tell you, I will never fall in love with you. Let me tell you, Su Meng. You're mine in this life." Xiao Yan grabbed Su Meng and pressed her body tightly against him. Xiao Yan held Su Meng's waist with one hand and his handsome face was serious. I said, you're my only wife. Chapter 72. Ning Shu's mouth twitched as he watched Xiao Yan and Su Meng tugging at each other, almost hugging each other. Although Su Meng was struggling, their bodies inexplicably got closer and closer. How was this a quarrel? This was fucking flirting, wasn't it? Let go of me, let go of me. Su Meng pounded on Xiao Yan's chest and shouted coquettishly, don't pester me anymore. You already have a wife, I don't want to be a mistress. Xiao Yan held Su Meng's waist tightly and said with a seductive smile, I want to pester you. You are my woman, don't even think about leaving me in this lifetime. You have already given birth to 2 children for me, you are the mother of my children. No, no. Su Meng pouted and gently pounded on Xiao Yan's chest with her little fist. Xiao Yan raised the corner of his mouth and smiled wickedly. If I say you are, then you are. The two showed off their affection as if there was no one else around, completely disregarding whether others could take it or not. Ugh! Ning Shu really couldn't help but vomit. The 2 people who were hugging each other immediately glared at Ning Shu. Ning Shu quickly waved his hand. Sorry, I really couldn't help it. I have never seen such a disgusting thing and couldn't help it. Sorry, you can continue. Find another place to continue. Just don't fucking do it in front of her. Ning Shu felt that he should wash his eyes. The scene in front of him really broke his moral integrity and destroyed his 3 views. Showing off their affection in front of his wife and a mistress was simply stabbing a knife into his heart. Su Meng pushed Xiao Yan away and pointed at Xiao Yan with her white finger. She was angry but seemed to be acting coquettishly. I'm warning you, don't come near me and don't touch me. I'm not interested in other women's husbands, humph. Ning Shu, help, pft. Ning Shu clutched her chest and almost vomited blood. She didn't know how to describe the female lead, Su Meng. Silly and sweet. Innocent and delicate. Not scheming. That didn't seem to be the case. To be more precise, she was willful and pretentious. Her mouth said no, but her body was very honest. If she really had no interest in Xiao Yan, she could do what she did 7 years ago. She could hide so that Xiao Yan couldn't find her, or she could find a suitor to be the child's father. Anyway, Su Meng had plenty of suitors around her. Su Meng made a speech that seemed very impassioned, then turned around and left. Xiao Yan chased after her helplessly and angrily. Ning Shu felt the malice of the universe. She would rather kill people like in the previous world than face this kind of male and female lead. Ning Shu reflexively touched her waist, but she didn't find the whip. Could she just whip the 2 of them to death? Anyway, the original owner's wish was not to get divorced. Being a widow wasn't a bad idea. With a husband like Xiao Yan, she might as well be a widow. Ning Shu's heart was filled with killing intent. She really fell in love with this simple and violent way of solving problems. Su Ran, let me tell you, I will never fall in love with you. The one I love is Su Meng. Xiao Yan, who went to chase Su Meng, ran back to the ward and shouted at Ning Shu. Ning Shu was dumbfounded. Seeing this idiot shouting at her for no reason, Ning Shu blinked and tilted her head to look at Xiao Yan. Fuck, crazy. I didn't do anything. If you love Su Meng, then love Su Meng. Why the hell are you shouting in front of me? Ning Shu's heart was filled with curses. Su Ran, you better know your place. Don't provoke Su Meng. If you don't, I will make you suffer. Xiao Yan's face was cold, and his eyes were filled with extreme disgust. There was a kind of viciousness that couldn't wait to get rid of her, but he seemed to be worried about something. Ning Shu lifted the quilt and walked in front of Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu coldly and sneered, Su Ran, give up. I will never fall in love with you, you vicious and hypocritical woman. Walking in front of Xiao Yan, Ning Shu found that Xiao Yan was really tall. He had a perfect inverted triangle figure with wide shoulders and a narrow waist. He wore a suit, which matched his handsome and perfectly sculpted face. He was handsome, rich, and had the powerful ability to do it 7 times a night. All the good things in the world were concentrated on him. He had all the requirements of a woman and a pervert. Fuck, Ning Shu had never seen such a pervert. He was obviously the one who cheated, but he was so righteous. Ning Shu didn't see any sense of responsibility for his family or his wife. He didn't have any sense of responsibility as a man. Instead, he treated his wife as the biggest obstacle in his love life. In the end, they could live happily together without any grudges. We don't understand the protagonist's world. Ning Shu sneered and raised her knee to Xiao Yan's crotch. Ning Shu used all her strength. She really couldn't stand Xiao Yan's chatter in front of her. Xiao Yan didn't expect that Ning Shu would hit his private part without saying anything. He immediately cried out in pain, and his handsome face was distorted. He held the wall with one hand and covered his crotch with the other. His legs were clamped, and he bent over in extreme pain. Hiss, you! Xiao Yan stared at Ning Shu with red eyes, looking shocked and painful. Obviously, he didn't expect that the woman who usually adored him would suddenly hit him. It was really painful. Ning Shu sneered and patted Xiao Yan's shoulder, who was bending over and covering his crotch. Do you feel very painful? Do you feel like your heart is breaking? The pain I felt when I lost my child was 1,000 times more painful than this. Tut, 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 Su ran. Xiao Yan's voice almost came out from between his teeth, which looked very gloomy and horrible. His eyes were red, and he looked like he was going to swallow Ning Shu alive. He reached out his hand and grabbed Ning Shu's wrist tightly. He was so strong that he wanted to break Ning Shu's wrist. Ning Shu's expression didn't change at all. She endured the pain in her hand and used all her strength to give Xiao Yan a big slap on the face. With a bang, Xiao Yan's head was knocked askew. Ning Shu said lightly, "Let go." Xiao Yan was almost stunned by Ning Shu's slap in the face. Then, his heart was filled with extreme anger and humiliation. He, Xiao Yan, had never been slapped in his life, let alone in such a way. Xiao Yan breathed heavily and turned his head to look at Ning Shu viciously. His eyes were red and filled with the desire to destroy the world, as if he was about to devour someone. Facing Xiao Yan's eyes, Ning Shu's expression didn't change. His sister even dared to kill people. How could this kind of eyes scare her? Let go. Ning Shu said lightly. Xiao Yan pulled Ning Shu's hand hard, almost crushing Ning Shu's wrist. Let go. Slap. A big slap in the face. Let go. Slap. Another big slap in the face. I said, let go. Slap, slap. The big slaps continued. Chapter 73. Although Xiao Yan was a man, his skin was very tender and smooth. Ning Shu slapped his face again and felt that it was slippery. With one hand being grabbed by Xiao Yan, Ning Shu could only focus on one side of Xiao Yan's face. After a while, half of Xiao Yan's face was swollen and bruised, forming a sharp contrast with the handsome face on the other side. Xiao Yan slowly turned his head to look at Ning Shu, a storm brewing in his eyes. He looked at Ning Shu maliciously. You're very good, hiss. Xiao Yan originally wanted to scare Ning Shu, but as soon as he spoke, he pulled the wound on his face and tears came down from the pain. Xiao Yan was going crazy. Seeing that Ning Shu was about to raise his hand to hit him again, he stopped covering his crotch and grabbed Ning Shu's raised hand. He squeezed Ning Shu's hands tightly and shouted, "You bitch." Ning Shu sneered. He didn't have hands but feet. Ning Shu quickly raised his foot and kicked Xiao Yan's crotch. Ning Shu's kick made Xiao Yan's eyes almost pop out of their sockets. He fell to the ground and covered his crotch, howling. Blue veins popped out on his forehead and cold sweat dripped down. Ning Shu moved his wrist, which was pinched by Xiao Yan, and turned blue. Ning Shu coldly looked at Xiao Yan, who was rolling on the ground. What a useless piece of trash. In the last world, Ning Shu had always wanted to kick Helianing to make her unable to have children, but he didn't get what he wanted. They were both men, but Xiao Yan was really a weakling. Ran Air, are you okay? Mrs. Su watched everything that happened just now. Seeing her daughter like this, she intuitively felt that her daughter had been driven crazy by Su Ran and Xiao Yan, this pair of bitches. Ning Shu shook his head. Mom, I'm fine. Then he walked to the bedside and pressed a button to call the doctor. Nurse, there's a patient with broken testicles. Come and save him. Ning Shu said lightly. Xiao Yan, who was in incomparable pain, heard Ning Shu's words. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at Ning Shu. His hatred was monstrous, as if he was about to devour someone. Coupled with his pig-like face, how could he not look funny? Not enough. Ning Shu raised his eyebrows and asked Xiao Yan. Ning Shu raised his foot. I can give you another kick. Su Ran, you'll regret messing with me. Xiao Yan's words were intermittent, and he was in so much pain that he couldn't stop breathing. Then, he stood up with the help of the wall and was about to walk away. Xiao Yan would never do it in such a private place. Otherwise, the headlines tomorrow would be that the president of Zhao's group was dying and that he had to go to the andrology department. Xiao Yan couldn't afford to lose face. Every step Xiao Yan took made his body tremble and sweat profusely. The muscles on his face trembled, which pulled the swollen wound on his face and made it even more painful. Su Ran, Su Ran. When Xiao Yan walked out of the ward, he turned to Ning Shu and called Su Ran's name through gritted teeth. It was very gloomy. Ning Shu smacked his lips. Look at you. I thought you fell in love with me. Xiao Yan coughed violently. Su Ran, you're shameless. Ning Shu shrugged and looked indifferent. Who in the world is more shameless than you? Xiao Yan, you are the most shameless person in the world. The nurse and doctor called by Ning Shu pushed the bed over. Seeing Xiao Yan, who was standing at the door with his legs clamped, they ignored Xiao Yan's struggle and opposition and pressed him on the bed, saying that they were going to push him to the operating room. Ning Shu thought viciously. He didn't know if they would cut off that part. If she couldn't have sex with Xiao Yan, would Su Meng still want it? Ning Shu felt some regret in her heart. If she could practice peerless martial arts in this world, her strength would be much greater. She could kick Xiao Yan until he was crippled. If she slapped him, Xiao Yan would definitely have a concussion. After coming to this world, Ning Shu tried to practice the martial arts of the last world when he felt better, but he didn't succeed. Every world had its own rules. Imagine a world with endless traffic. It was unreasonable for a person to be able to fly over roofs and vault over walls. Moreover, the spiritual energy in this world couldn't be used for practice. Ran Air. Mrs. Su looked at Ning Shu worriedly. Won't Xiao Yan hate you more if you do this? Are you pushing Xiao Yan to that little bitch Su Meng? It's okay, Mom. I know what to do. Ning Shu sneered in his heart. She was not in love with Xiao Yan. Besides, the original host didn't ask her to get Xiao Yan back. Why should she swallow the insult? Otherwise, Xiao Yan and Su Meng would come to her every day to disgust her. Mrs. Su saw that Ning Shu was calm and didn't have the pain and madness of losing the children. She said, you have to save face. If you treat Xiao Yan like this, your parents-in-law will have a problem with you. Her existence was a mistake. No matter what she did, Xiao Yan's parents would have a problem with it. Especially now that they had 2 golden grandchildren. The original host Su Ran was a thorn in their side. However, for the sake of the Su family, they didn't divorce her. But the title of the young madam of the Shao family existed in name only. You'll be discharged tomorrow. Are you going back to the Su family or the Shao family? Mrs. Su asked Ning Shu. After thinking for a while, she said, now that little bitch Su Meng has a strong momentum because she gave birth to 2 children for Xiao Yan. Let's go home first. There will always be a chance to deal with that little bitch. Now Xiao Yan is hot to that little bitch. When Xiao Yan is tired of her, it will be our chance. Ning Shu shook her head and said, I'm the young madam of the Xiao family. Of course I'll go back to the Xiao family. After that, I'll go back to the Su family. I have something to discuss with my father. If the plot was right, the Su family and the Mu family were cooperating, but the Su family was directly hollowed out on a project. This was a trap set by Xiao Yan. He dealt with the Su family because of Su Ran, the annoying existence, and also to avenge Su Meng's parents. The woman he loved was wronged. Of course, he would seek justice. In addition to what she had just done to Xiao Yan, now Xiao Yan wanted to eat her flesh and drink her blood. Just now she had plucked the tiger's whiskers. She had to think about her own life. She might as well kill Xiao Yan. Tut tut, this was not good. It was too violent. Ning Shu thought that she was a gentle person. How could she let Xiao Yan die so easily? Besides, murder was illegal. This was not the ancient time where human life was worthless. The original owner of the body did not want to be a murderer. Ning Shu thought about it in her heart. If Xiao Yan didn't have his current status, he wouldn't have the capital to be proud of, and he wouldn't have the courage to throw away money like that. How would he be able to flirt with Su Meng, be lovey-dovey, be lovey-dovey? All romance was built on money. In order to survive, ordinary people always wanted to earn money to support themselves. How could they have the time and money to be romantic? Without the halo, Xiao Yan was down and out. He had to run for 3 meals a day. Would Su Meng still be with him? Maybe. After all, it was true love. So she decided to protect the Su family from being annexed by the Xiao family. At the same time, if possible, it would be best to destroy the Xiao family. Chapter 74. The next day, Ning Shu was discharged from the hospital and returned to Zhao's house with a bag of things. Zhao's house was very big, with a villa garden, statues and fountains. It looked like a top-rich family. When Ning Shu returned to Zhao's house, no one came to receive her. She was completely treated as an invisible person. This kind of embarrassment was unbearable for most people. But Ning Shu calmly walked into the living room. Before she saw anyone, she heard the laughter in the hall. There were adults' hearty voices mixed with children's innocent laughter. Ning Shu glanced around and saw the spacious living room. The floor was full of various toys. Xiao Yan's parents were sitting on the sofa and playing with the 2 children. Ning Shu carefully looked at the 2 babies. One of them was Su Debao, who looked like a little adult. He was very cute, with white and tender skin, a pair of purple grape-like eyes, and slightly curly hair. He was wearing suspenders and a small red bow tie on his shirt. He looked very serious, which made people's hearts melt. One of them was Su Xiaobao, who was dressing the dolls. He had soft and slightly curly hair like Su Meng and looked extremely sweet. Wearing a tutu skirt, he looked like a little princess who was favored by the heavens. The 2 children were really cute. However, if it wasn't for Su Debao's actions, Ning Shu would have really praised the 2 children's appearance that defied the heavens. As soon as Ning Shu came in, the happy atmosphere froze, as if a cold current swept by. Everyone's eyes were focused on Ning Shu, especially Su Debao, who tilted his head and looked at Ning Shu. His eyes flashed with a sly and mischievous light, but it made Ning Shu's back hair stand up. How is this a child's eyes? Su Debao is really a dangerous existence. He has a smart brain, but he doesn't have a sense of right and wrong. He does things according to his mood. For example, the original Su Ran was pregnant. Su Debao immediately knew that the child in the original Su Ran's belly would threaten the relationship between his father and his mother, and also threaten the position of him and his sister, so he pushed her downstairs. She was really vicious. She had the naivety and cruelty of a child. Ning Shu's impression of Su Meng became even worse. Since she had given birth to a child, she should educate the child and set up a correct worldview for the child. However, Su Meng was busy getting into trouble and being lovable in a daze. Sometimes, Su Debao, who was still a child, had to deal with the aftermath. The money that Su Debao earned was enough for Su Meng to live comfortably. He was like a mature child, but Su Debao felt that he could protect his mother and was very happy with his sister. It was a completely deformed mother-son relationship. Ning Shu walked in as if there was no one around. Madame Xiao stood up. Ning Shu said, "You're back." Ning Shu nodded and went upstairs. Seeing that Ning Shu ignored them like this, Master Xiao and Madame Zhao's face turned ugly. They turned to look at the back of Ning Shu going upstairs. Master Xiao frowned, dissatisfaction flashed across his face. If Madame Xiao didn't have a child in front of her, she would have already scolded Ning Shu. What does it mean to not divorce even if you die? Madame Xiao wasn't so satisfied with Su Meng, but for the sake of a pair of children, she accepted Su Meng. However, Su Ran also didn't have good eyesight. She shouldn't have taken the initiative to divorce. Su Debao's eyes turned and his face immediately smiled. He threw himself into Master Zhao's arms and said, "Grandpa, don't be angry." Debao doesn't want Grandpa to be angry. Mommy said that anger is bad for people's health. Yes, Xiaobao also doesn't want Grandpa to be angry. Su Xiaobao put down the doll and said to Master Xiao. Master Xiao suddenly smiled and touched Su Debao's head. Okay, Grandpa won't be angry. Grandpa doesn't like to be angry. Humph, you only care about whether your grandpa is angry or not. Grandma is also angry. Madame Xiao said this, but her face showed a sincere and kind smile. Su Xiaobao immediately touched Madame Zhao's face with his small hand and said with a serious face, "Grandma, don't be angry. Anger will make you old." Xiaobao hopes that Grandma will always be so beautiful and young. Madame Xiao felt that her heart was about to melt. This was simply the two treasures that God gave to the Xiao family. Ning Shu didn't care about how lovey-dovey the grandfather and grandson were. When he returned to the bedroom, he put away the jewelry on the dressing table and some particularly valuable things. Many of the things were the dowry of the original owner and were very valuable. After the original owner Su Ran was defeated in the Su family, she was kicked out of the house by Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan gave a lot of the original owner's things to Su Meng. He also said that he got back all the things that Su Meng lost. These things should have been Su Meng's. Ning Shu felt like she was drunk. She was so drunk that she couldn't take it. Ning Shu put the jewelry and some precious shares in the bag and then prepared to go to the bank to open a safe. These things were to be left for the cruel and unscrupulous people. Not to mention that the original owner didn't agree, even Ning Shu wanted to vomit. Even Ning Shu, an outsider, couldn't help but feel angry. There was actually such a shameless person in the world. He was simply a strange space carrier. Ning Shu went downstairs with a bag of things. The happy atmosphere that Su Debao and Su Xiaobao tried to create was frozen by Ning Shu. Ning Shu suddenly felt that he had become the king of awkward silence. When he walked to the door, Ning Shu suddenly turned back and said to the people in the living room, "I will be back for lunch. Remember to leave some food for me. I want to eat abalone at noon. Tell the kitchen to leave some for me. It must be left. I had a miscarriage and need to nourish my body." As Ning Shu spoke, his eyes stopped on Su Debao. Su Debao looked at Ning Shu innocently with his head tilted. "Auntie, why are you looking at me? I am not an abalone." Ning Shu looked at Su Debao seriously and said, "You shouldn't call me auntie. You should call me auntie. In ancient times, your mother was a concubine. I am your mother." Su Debao's face suddenly became gloomy. A pair of eyes looked at Ning Shu fiercely. He secretly made a throat-slitting gesture to Ning Shu, which really made people feel cold. Ning Shu's expression didn't change. In the end, he was still a child. He couldn't help but add fuel to the fire. "Remember to call me auntie in the future. Call your mother little mom." Su Debao could hold it in, but Su Xiaobao suddenly burst into tears. "My mother is not my stepmother." "No, you bad woman." Seeing their baby crying, the two elders of the Xiao family suddenly panicked and coaxed the crying child. "Su Ran, why are you saying this to a child? What are you saying?" Mrs. Xiao glared at Ning Shu. "Oh, baby, don't cry. Grandma's heart hurts." Ning Shu curled her lips. "Is there any justice? She was just telling the truth. What's wrong with her? Why is her heart so fragile? She allowed Su Meng to do it and didn't let others say it." Chapter 75. Ning Shu was too lazy to look at the grandparent and grandchild affectionate scene. She said to the servant at home, "Remember to get me abalone." Ning Shu's words made the four of them stare at her, especially Su Debao, who looked at Ning Shu with a particularly gloomy expression. Su Xiaobao was coaxing his sister while crying loudly. He looked at Ning Shu through the gaps between his fingers. As long as Ning Shu's eyes met his, he would immediately burst into tears. It was as if he was scared to tears by Ning Shu. He cried pitifully. "Now that the child is crying like this, you still say that it's abalone. Su Ran, have you never eaten abalone in your 8 lifetimes?" Mrs. Xiao coaxed Su Xiaobao while glaring at Ning Shu. "Ning Shu, she really hasn't eaten abalone in her 8 lifetimes. Sure enough, her existence was a mistake. No matter what she did, it was a mistake." Ning Shu turned around and left. She was not going to beg the Xiao family. Even a child as young as her was giving her attitude and scheming behind her back. It must have been hard for the naive Su Meng to give birth to such a scheming child. Could it be that the Xiao family's genes were like this? Toward Ning Shu's attitude, it could be said that the Xiao family's couple was furious. A daughter-in-law was so arrogant. She actually had such an attitude toward the elderly. Look at what kind of daughter-in-law she married. Marry a virtuous wife. How could such a woman be the future matriarch of the Xiao family? Ning Shu didn't care about what others thought. First, she went to the bank to open a safe and locked everything. After everything was done, Ning Shu returned to the Su family to see the father of this body. Ning Shu couldn't believe that a person who had been in the business world for half his life would fall into the hands of Xiao Yan, who was younger than him. And the protagonist's aura didn't need to be explained. When the supporting characters met the protagonist, their IQ would plummet to below the normal level. Su Ran's father was an elegant middle-aged man with a calm temperament. He looked like a mature and elegant businessman. When he saw Ning Shu, he looked at Ning Shu from head to toe and said, "You've just been discharged from the hospital. Don't run around." Ning Shu smiled and said, "Dad, I'm fine now." Mr. Su frowned when he saw the smile on Ning Shu's face. "How can you still smile in this situation? You can't even protect your own child, falling into the hands of a 6-year-old child. Don't you think it's embarrassing? Are you still my daughter?" Ning Shu secretly curled his lips. "Aren't you going to fall into Xiao Yan's hands in the future?" Not a single strand of hair was left in the Su family. They were all plundered by Xiao Yan. "Father, I was wrong. What else could I have done?" Those two children have subdued the entire Xiao family. Now, I don't even have a place to stand in the Xiao family. Ning Shu said pitifully. What a good-for-nothing. You can't even compare with a child. Su Bo frowned tightly. If this goes on, I'm afraid that the business between the Su family and the Xiao family will collapse. Dad. Ning Shu looked at Su Bo seriously. Let's not cooperate with the Xiao family. Now Su Meng and Xiao Yan are in love, and Xiao Yan said that he would avenge Su Meng and her parents. Su Meng always thought that it was you who killed her parents. We should look for a new breakthrough. Ning Shu's face was gloomy, as if he had been betrayed by a man. Su Bo's face changed. He was skeptical about the news and said, business is business. Xiao Yan won't destroy the business of two families for a woman. Ning Shu responded to Su Bo's words with a smile. For Su Meng, Xiao Yan would do anything. Otherwise, how could he express his love for Su Meng and fulfill the two children's wish to be together as a family and their parents love each other? Since you're married, you should take care of your husband and children. Don't get involved in the business. Su Bo said, take good care of yourself and give birth to an heir for the Xiao family. As for Su Meng's two children, they are illegitimate children. They can't shake your position. Ning Shu's heart sank. She didn't expect Su Bo to be so stubborn and not believe what she said at all. Could it be that the Su family really couldn't escape the fate of being annexed? Ning Shu thought for a moment and felt that she was too impatient. The business between the Xiao family and the Su family had always been good and nothing had gone wrong. She rashly said that the Xiao family was going to deal with the Su family. Of course, Su Bo didn't believe her. Su Bo probably thought that she was crazy because of the loss of her children and Su Meng, her love rival, so she said such a harmful idea. Ning Shu felt that it was necessary to find evidence to make Su Bo believe her, but she couldn't pin all her hopes on the Su family. She finally understood why the Su family was defeated in an instant. It was because Su Bo trusted the Xiao family too much and didn't expect that Xiao Yan would destroy the Su family in one fell swoop. Ran Air, do you want to have lunch at home? Madame Su asked Ning Shu. Ning Shu shook her head. She had achieved her goal today. I'm not eating at home. Ning Shu said to Su Bo seriously, Father, soon, the Xiao family will develop a piece of land. It's said that it's planned by the Zheng family. When the time comes, the Su family will definitely be involved. This case is Xiao Yan's plan to deal with the He family. Maybe I'm overthinking, but father, please be careful. Ning Shu reminded Su Bo that if the Su family's path didn't work, there were other paths to take. After spending a short time with Su Bo, Ning Shu found that Su Bo was actually a person who looked down on women. Moreover, his daughter was married. Strictly speaking, she wasn't a member of the Su family. Su Bo was probably still angry that he suddenly came back to sow discord between the two families. Ning Shu thought about it and felt that it was quite boring. He came back with good intentions, but in the end, Su Bo didn't appreciate it at all. When Ning Shu was about to leave, the brother of the original Su Ran came back. Su Lan was currently studying in university. When she saw Ning Shu call her sister, her gaze moved to Ning Shu's stomach. Ning Shu said, Sister, don't be too sad. It's all because the child is immature. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes. How could he say that? Ning Shu looked at Su Lan. Su Lan looked like Su Bo. She was wearing a white shirt and looked gentle. She had a noble aura around her. She was the school hunk. Who told you that Su Debao was careless? Ning Shu frowned and looked at Su Lan. Su Lan's face showed a disapproving expression. Cousin Su Meng has already explained to me that the child was careless. Sister, you're very sad that you lost your child, but you can't push all the blame to an immature child. These words were directly saying that even if you want to frame someone, don't frame a child. Ning Shu looked up to the sky and roared in his heart. Another man kneeling under the halo of Mary Sue. Under the halo of Mary Sue, all men kneel or become cannon fodder. Ning Shu felt his heart twitching. A feeling of sadness filled his heart. His own brother didn't believe him. Instead, he spoke up for Su Meng. The original Su Meng was angry and helpless facing such a brother. She hated Su Meng even more. However, Ning Shu only had one feeling. She wanted to slap this kid. Chapter 76. Ning Shu didn't expect the original owner's younger brother to be such a joker. Could this be the plot? A good person would appear in the enemy's camp? A good person in Su Meng's eyes? Ning Shu looked at Su Lan. She was a little fresh meat with a clean temperament, not as cool and arrogant as the male lead Xiao Yan. TSK, so this is the future master of the Su family. Everything in the Su family will be inherited by Su Lan. Su Lan, apologize to your sister. Madame Su saw her daughter's unkind expression. She's your sister. How can you just listen to what Su Meng says? Madame Su loved her son dearly, but her daughter was also her own flesh and blood. Now that they quarreled because of Su Meng, Madame Su hated Su Meng even more. Su Lan frowned and straightened her neck. It's my sister's fault. Everyone is sad that we lost our child, but it's wrong of her to frame someone else. Ning Shu rolled his eyes and sneered in his heart. He walked in front of Su Lan. She wasn't as tall as Su Lan, but when she looked up at Su Lan, Su Lan's heart trembled. Her eyes were very cold, making Su Lan's heart flutter. Ning Shu frowned and looked at Su Lan. Were you there? Do you know how it happened? Before Su Lan could speak, Ning Shu's hand slapped Su Lan's face, causing her head to tilt to the side. Su Lan turned her head and looked at Ning Shu with resentment. Ning Shu's slap stunned everyone present. Su Bo's face turned ugly. His daughter hit his son, especially now that his daughter was married. Even if it was someone from another family, now that they came to meddle in his family's affairs, they even dared to enter his house and hit people. Su Bo coldly snorted, but it didn't make Ning Shu feel anything. People always save themselves, then the heavens save them. Ning Shu didn't have a good impression of Su Bo. This mission couldn't start with the Su family. An old-fashioned head of the family, a man who knelt under the halo of the female lead, Mary Su, deserved to be defeated. On the contrary, Su Ran and Madame Su were both women, so they could resist the halo of Mary Su to a certain extent. But in Su Lan's heart, her sister and mother were the bad guys. Madame Su looked at Ning Shu and said, "What are you doing? You're making your family sad and your enemies happy." Ning Shu smiled and ignored Su Lan's resentful eyes. He raised his hand and gave Su Lan a big slap. "You're already an adult, but you don't even have the ability to understand right and wrong. Without the Su family, you're just scum." He was just relying on the Su family's support, living a life that was above the common populace, just like a noble young master. Once Xiao Yan plundered the Su family, this noble young master would have to eat dirt. People like Su Lan couldn't even catch up with the heat of the feces. She looked like a little bottom, just looking like someone who was suppressed by others. Ning Shu looked down on brainless people like Su Lan the most. They were played around by women. He estimated that before Xiao Yan made a move, Su Lan would offer up the Su family with both hands to resolve the hatred of the previous generation and make up for the grievances of the female lead. The halo of Mary Su was really powerful. "Why did you hit me, Su Ran? People like you deserve to be loved by no one. You're cold and selfish. Your life is so poor, and your heart is so vicious." Half of Su Ran's face was swollen. Ning Shu thought, how did such a perverted person come into being? Ning Shu laughed and raised his hand to give Su Lan another slap. Ning Shu suddenly realized that he had fallen in love with the feeling of slapping one side of the face. The two sides of her face formed a sharp contrast. I hit you to tell you that I don't need anyone, and I don't need your love. I hit you because you slandered me. Ning Shu blew on his hand. What are you talking about? Don't forget that Su Meng is your cousin. Looking at you, I would think that you've fallen in love with her. What nonsense are you talking about? Su Lan anxiously shouted at Ning Shu with a pale face, your thoughts are so dirty. Who are you shouting at? Ning Shu raised his hand and gave the emotional Su Lan another slap. Su Bo stood up and shouted, enough. What do you want? Su Bo's gaze lingered between Ning Shu and Su Lan, and finally stopped on Ning Shu. As a married woman, you should take good care of your in-laws and husband. Why are you throwing a tantrum so easily? What happened to the etiquette that you were taught since you were young? Dad. Ning Shu didn't even want to call him dad now. He wasn't his dad to begin with. Ning Shu always thought that if you were good to him, he would be good to you. There was no such thing as love or hate for no reason in this world. Other than Madame Su, Ning Shu didn't like the father and son of the Su family. Before I leave, I have something to say. Ning Shu pointed at Su Lan, whose half-face was swollen, with a look of disdain. If the heir of the Su family is like this, he might as well be swallowed up by the Shao family. Anyway, looking at him like this, Su Meng is his family. She doesn't even have feelings for me, her sister. As for you two, TSK TSK TSK. Su Ran, you vicious woman, are you crazy? Su Lan listened to Ning Shu's words, you said that I don't treat you as my sister, but now you're saying that I'm your younger brother. I don't treat you as my younger brother. Ning Shu lightly said, because in your heart, Su Meng is your sister. Naturally, I won't treat you as my younger brother. Ning Shu raised his hand. Su Lan shivered, thinking that Ning Shu was going to hit him again, and took 2 steps back. Look at you, you have the words spare tire written on your head. In the future, don't make a fuss in front of me. Otherwise, every time I see you, I'll hit you once. Ning Shu lightly said. Don't try to reason with this kind of brainless person. Otherwise, they will use their rich experience to defeat you. However, if you want to ask, why do these men obediently let Ning Shu hit them? That's because Ning Shu would retreat to a safe position every time she hit them. If the men were shameless, they could chase her around the house and hit her. Obviously, Su Lan was not such a person. He would not do such a thing. Moreover, Su Lan's reflexes were not sharp. After being hit by Ning Shu, he would only look at her with shocked and resentful eyes. Therefore, Ning Shu despised him even more. Ning Shu came out of the Su family and looked up at the sky. This time, he couldn't start with the Su family. He had to find a new entrance. The Su family was not the only one he could cooperate with. Moreover, Ning Shu's current intention was to make the Su family suffer. Ning Shu was not an emotionless machine. She also had her own emotions. During the mission, she would also have her own preferences. The host wanted to protect the Su family and prevent the Shao family from annexing it. If the Shao family was destroyed, they naturally couldn't annex the Su family. Originally, she wanted to join hands with the Su family, but the Su family obviously looked down on her as a married daughter. There was nothing to talk about with the Su family. Ning Shu probably would not come to the Su family in the future. Ning Shu decided to sell the dowry shares that the Su family gave her and the shares that the Shao family gave to her daughter-in-law. They were all exchanged for real money to complete the great task of destroying the Shao family. P.S. Some students think that the school doctor and Li Wen are the same person. The author kneels down to the student's imagination. One has a venomous tongue and nitpicky OCD, wanton and unrestrained love of freedom, and the other has a deep and expressionless face, seemingly emotional yet ruthless person. How could they be the same person? Chapter 77. Ning Shu decided to sell the ancient shares of the Shao family and the Su family. The money he got was the real deal. The president, whose face was swollen after being beaten by Ning Shu, went to see Su Meng with a swollen face. Su Meng didn't recognize Xiao Yan at all and screamed for help. Xiao Yan could only look at Su Meng with an evil look and said incoherently with a swollen face, "It's me, I'm Xiao Yan." Su Meng was stunned and asked anxiously, "What's wrong with you?" Xiao Yan wanted to smile evilly, but the wound on his face was pulled and he grimaced in pain. After a long time, he said, "Are you concerned about me?" "Humph." Su Meng snorted and turned her head away from Xiao Yan. "I have nothing to do with you. Why should I care about you? I don't want to see you." "Humph, go away." Xiao Yan smiled. "I know you care about me. Why can't you admit it? You have your wife to care about. It's not my turn to care about you." Su Meng curled her lips and pouted, which made Xiao Yan swallow a mouthful of saliva. "Don't mention that bitch Su ran to me. My face is all because of that bitch." Xiao Yan gnashed his teeth and said in a gloomy and resentful voice. Su Meng covered her mouth in surprise and stared at Xiao Yan with her almond-shaped eyes. Xiao Yan was a little distracted by Su Meng's look. "Although I hate Su Ran very much, I also know that Su Ran loves you very much. How could she hit you? She is too cruel. How could she hit you like this?" Su Meng said as she reached out her hand and gently touched Xiao Yan's face. Xiao Yan's eyes lit up. Previously, Su Meng had been very angry about Su Ran's pregnancy. Ever since that bitch Su Ran started her confinement period, she had ignored him. Now that she took the initiative to show concern for him, Xiao Yan immediately grabbed Su Meng's hand and hissed, "My face hurts." "Ah." Su Meng opened her eyes wide and looked at Xiao Yan with watery eyes. "Did I hurt you? I'll go find some medicine for you." Xiao Yan grabbed Su Meng, who was about to go look for the medicine, and pulled her into his arms. He looked at Su Meng with sparkling eyes and said softly, "You are my medicine. When I see you, I don't feel pain anymore." As he spoke, he kissed Su Meng. At first, Su Meng struggled a little. Her eyes widened in shock, and then she closed her eyes. Xiao Yan pressed Su Meng down on the sofa and rubbed her body. Su Meng's face turned pink as she moaned, "Don't, don't." This sound made Xiao Yan incomparably excited. His lower body was in high spirits, but it also made Xiao Yan hiss in pain. His lower body felt like it was being torn apart, making Xiao Yan feel as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over him. Su Ran, this despicable woman. He had already waited for the doctor to confirm that he was fine before coming to look for Su Meng. After being kicked by Su Ran, it was a little swollen. The doctor had already reduced the swelling, but he did not expect that it would be so painful when it hardened. Su Meng wriggled in Xiao Yan's arms and moaned. She opened her hazy eyes and looked at the man on top of her. Xiao Yan endured the pain. He should have kissed Su Meng's lips, but instead, he kissed her forehead. Xiao Yan looked at Su Meng tenderly. "I will wait until you truly accept me. I want to give you a real wedding night." Su Meng blinked her eyes and then realized that something was wrong. She pushed Xiao Yan away and gathered her collar. She widened her eyes and shouted at Xiao Yan, "What did you do to me? You have a wife. How can you do such a thing to me?" "Humph, big pervert." Su Meng said hatefully to Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan reached out and pulled Su Meng to his side. Su Meng struggled and hit Xiao Yan's chest with her little fist. "Let go of me, you big pervert." "Yes, I'm a big pervert. What's wrong with me doing such a thing to my wife?" Xiao Yan looked at Su Meng seriously. "You are my only wife in this life." Su Meng's body suddenly froze. She raised her head and looked at Xiao Yan. "You are lying to me." Don't you have a cousin? Remember, I have nothing to do with you. No, we have nothing to do with each other. You are my cousin-in-law. My wife will always be you. As for Su Ran, I will deal with her. Xiao Yan said gloomily. Not only Su Ran, but also the Su family. I will take revenge for all the grievances you have suffered. I will also avenge my father-in-law and mother-in-law. Su Meng's face blushed and she was a little touched. Then she said coquettishly, who are your father-in-law and mother-in-law? Don't call them that. I have never thought of marrying you. Xiao Yan made a lot of promises to Su Meng. The two people were very affectionate, but there was a little shadow in Xiao Yan's heart, which was his lifeblood. Coming out of Su Meng's small apartment, Xiao Yan went to the hospital. As long as he thought of this, Xiao Yan thought of the woman he hated, the person who was nominally his wife. When he heard the doctor say that it was not wasted, Xiao Yan breathed a sigh of relief and asked why it was so painful when there was a reaction. The doctor said that he had to pay more attention to recuperation and should not have sex in the next 2 months. Su Ran, this bitch. Xiao Yan stepped on the gas and went back to the Xiao family, but Ning Shu arrived home before Xiao Yan. When Ning Shu arrived home, the house was quiet. Even Mr. Xiao and Mrs. Xiao were not at home. He also did not see Su Debao and Su Xiaobao. Ning Shu pulled a servant and asked, where are the others in the house? Seeing that it was the young madam, the servant looked a little indifferent and said, I don't know. Oh, anyone in the Xiao family could despise her. Ning Shu grabbed the servant's arm and asked coldly, where are they? I'm asking you a question. The servant was frightened by Ning Shu's cold face. Just as he was about to speak, he was interrupted by a roar. Su Ran, Ning Shu picked his ears. The voice sounded a little familiar. Ning Shu turned his head and saw Xiao Yan, whose face was still bruised. Xiao Yan walked quickly to Ning Shu. Ning Shu roared, Su Ran, you vicious woman. What's wrong with the servant? Are you starting to abuse the servant now? Ning Shu sneered. Seeing such a perverted person, he did not want to open his eyes. Now, she had even accused her of being evil. What the fuck was this? Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu with undisguised disgust and hatred in his eyes. As long as he thought of the doctor's words, Xiao Yan wanted to tear Ning Shu apart. His beloved woman suffered because of such a vicious, greedy and hypocritical woman. Such a person could not even be compared to Su Meng's hair. When the servant saw Xiao Yan, he quickly said, young master, and young miss are in the hospital. Now master and madam are in the hospital. Chapter 78. When Xiao Yan heard that the 2 babies were sent to the hospital, his face instantly changed and his eyes turned red. Ning Shu roared, what did you do this time? Ning Shu was speechless. What did I do? What did I do? I don't even know why. Su Ran, if anything happens to the 2 children, I will bury you with them. Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu with hatred, turned around and got into the car to go to the hospital. Ning Shu was in a mess. He covered his heart and felt very tired. Why did he feel that the people in this world were so unreasonable and so willful? Which hospital? Ning Shu asked the servant lightly. When the servant saw how disgusted the eldest young master was with the young madam, she looked at Ning Shu with even more disdain. It was the same no matter where one bowed to the superior and stepped on the inferior. The servant said unhappily, I don't know which hospital she is in. Ning Shu looked at the servant indifferently, I ask you, which hospital? Even if I have no status in this family, I still have the qualification to dismiss you. In the central hospital. The servant quickly said. Ning Shu planned to go and see what the situation was. The 2 children were sent to the hospital at the same time. Even Su Debao, who had a high IQ, was sent to the hospital. When Ning Shu arrived at the central hospital, he heard Su Meng's heart-wrenching cry from far away in the corridor. Ning Shu's heart moved. Were the two babies going to die? Impossible. These two were important tools to improve the relationship between Xiao Yan and Su Meng. That's right, tools. In Ning Shu's view, these two children were Su Meng's golden fingers. Su Debao was the breadwinner of the family, and Su Xiaobao was the one who acted spoiled and cute. The two children could clear the obstacles in front of Su Meng. Before they married into the family, they had already won the favor of Su Meng's parents-in-law and helped Su Meng get rid of his annoying wife with his father. This was not a child. This was a complete freak. It was too illogical. Ning Shu walked over and saw Su Meng, who was usually delicate and pretty, on the verge of fainting from crying in Xiao Yan's arms. Xiao Yan kept comforting Su Meng, looking anxious. Old Master Xiao and Madame Xiao were sitting on the chairs, unable to sit still. Ning Shu walked over and successfully received everyone's disgusted gazes. Ning Shu felt very bitter in his heart. It was not easy to be hated by everyone. What are you doing here? Xiao Yan raised his chin and looked at Ning Shu. Don't mess with me, or you'll have to bear the consequences. Ning Shu frowned. She really didn't know how to communicate with these people. Couldn't they talk nicely? They were always yelling and acting cool and arrogant. Ning Shu really couldn't stand it. Su Meng, who was leaning in Xiao Yan's arms, looked at Ning Shu with red eyes and said sadly, Su Ran, the child is innocent. If you have any dissatisfaction, you can come at me. I just hope that you won't hurt my child. Ning Shu, can you get out of the arms of someone else's husband? Don't you think it's disgusting to lean in the arms of someone else's husband and say this? Ning Shu said indifferently. What did I do to your child? If she had done something to bear such a crime, Ning Shu wouldn't say anything. But now, she didn't even know what had happened. She was confused and these people were blaming her. He was about to be driven crazy by others. Su Meng stared at Ning Shu with her eyes wide open. Her big almond-shaped eyes were clear and innocent. She emotionally withdrew from Xiao Yan's arms, tears streaming down her face. Don't come near me. I just want my child to be fine. Xiao Yan looked at Su Meng with pity and tried to hold Su Meng. It's okay. Our child will be fine. Su Meng struggled in Xiao Yan's arms and cried, Don't touch me. If I get close to you, my child will be hurt. I don't want anything to happen to my child. Xiao Yan, please let me and my child go. Ning Shu, help, puff. Ning Shu supported herself against the wall with one hand and covered her heart with the other. She was really upset. The protagonist was really capricious and yelled in the hospital. She didn't care much about the two children and could leave them with the Xiao family. She didn't need to worry about the two children at all. Su Meng, who was already a mother of two children, was still living like a young girl. Now she was acting like this again. Ning Shu felt that she was going to vomit blood. Alright, stop fooling around. Old Master Xiao spoke up to stop the two people's tragic drama. Xiao Yan comforted Su Meng helplessly and asked Mr. Xiao, Father, what's wrong with the two children? Ning Shu almost laughed out loud. She was so focused on acting out the scene of life and death with Su Meng that she didn't even know what was going on with her own child. He felt drunk. Mrs. Xiao glared at Ning Shu, who couldn't help laughing, and said to Ning Shu angrily, It's all your fault. Why did you want to eat abalone? You greedy woman. Ning Shu, what does it have to do with me? Mother, what's going on? Xiao Yan stared at Ning Shu viciously. Sure enough, Su Ran, you are really vicious. You won't even let the children go. It's all this woman's fault. She wanted to eat abalone. At noon, the two children ate too much abalone and couldn't digest it. Now they came to the hospital to vomit. Mrs. Xiao glared at Ning Shu. Mr. Xiao also said, don't have abalone in the house in the future. Ning Shu, Mama, I want to go home. The people here are all crazy. Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu with disgust. Ning Shu sneered and said, I wasn't the one who forced them to eat it. I wasn't the one who forced them to eat it. Or was it me who poisoned the abalone? What did it have to do with her? You're still quibbling. If you didn't scare Xiao Bao to tears, the children wouldn't have indigestion. Mrs. Xiao sneered and said. Ning Shu, she felt so tired. Why were the people in this world so crazy? Where was their logic? Where was their worldview? They blamed everything on her, but these people still acted as if it was natural. They were crazy. Ning Shu felt very bitter. He felt like a normal person living in a crazy world. What were these people's brains used for? Ning Shu thought for a while and understood. She guessed that when she went out and said that she wanted to eat abalone, the two mischievous children didn't want to let her eat it. Then, they ate it themselves and didn't want to leave any for this despicable woman. Children were prone to indigestion. Now, these two children were in the hospital. The abalone was innocent. She was innocent too. No one saw the intentions behind these two children's actions. They were pranks and malicious thoughts. Ning Shu felt that he deserved it for courting death like this. Su Ran, I won't allow you to hurt my children again. Xiao Yan looked at Ning Shu. I want to divorce you, evil woman. Dream on. He wouldn't divorce her even if he died. Chapter 79. When Ning Shu heard Xiao Yan talk about divorce, she immediately objected. If she divorced Xiao Yan, her task would be over. She had put up with these idiots for so long, and she couldn't lose the task. At least, she couldn't break off the marriage with Xiao Yan in this world. Looking at the arrogant Xiao Yan, Ning Shu said fiercely, if you say this again, I'll beat you. Ning Shu's words stunned everyone. Xiao Yan's face swelled to a purple hue. Su Ran, you vicious woman, I'll never fall in love with you. Don't try to bind me with marriage. Xiao Yan roared at Ning Shu, I will never fall in love with you in this life or the next life, you vicious woman. Ning Shu was almost deafened by Xiao Yan's voice. He picked his ears and said, keep your voice down. You're so noisy that you'll disturb the vomit-inducing doctor inside. If you don't pay attention, the vomit-inducing tube will puncture your baby's stomachs. Xiao Yan's heart swelled because of Ning Shu's words, but he had to worry about the two babies, so he looked depressed as if he was constipated. You. Mrs. Xiao pointed at Ning Shu and said, you're threatening people. Mr. Xiao also looked at Ning Shu unkindly. Obviously, he thought that Ning Shu had offended the dignity of men and his son. Su Meng walked to Xiao Yan, and Ning Shu said, cousin, Xiao Yan doesn't love you. Why are you so persistent? You want to stay in a marriage without love. A marriage without love is a grave. Ning Shu looked at Su Meng coldly and said, I have a grave, but you can only die in the wild. You don't even have a grave. You. Su Meng stamped her feet angrily and said, I'm just trying to persuade you because we're both women. Don't be ungrateful. Can you not steal other people's husbands for the sake of women? Ning Shu was about to kneel down in front of Su Meng. This logic, this worldview. Ning Shu felt that he was quite powerful when he stood beside someone else's husband and advised them to leave if there was no love between them. However, he was still disgusted by these people. Don't say anything more, Su Ran. I'll prepare the document. You just need to sign it. Xiao Yan seemed to be very dignified and said in a very high and mighty manner. At this moment, the two vomit-inducing children were pushed out. They were lying on the hospital beds, their breathing shallow. Their faces were pale, and even their eyes were dim. Everyone no longer cared about the topic of divorce. They all surrounded the child on the hospital bed. Su Meng looked at the two precious eggs and cried loudly as if she was about to die. Ning Shu glanced at the side and then left. She didn't have time to waste on these idiots. Ning Shu only had one thought in her mind. She wanted to leave this world as soon as possible, even if the points were a little less. She really didn't want to stay in this world anymore. This world was really too much. It completely revolved around the main character. If the main character felt that it was right, then it was right. If the main character said that it was wrong, then it was wrong. In such a willful and unreasonable world, normal people would be driven crazy. Ning Shu was sitting in a coffee shop. She was waiting for someone. Ning Shu raised her wrist and looked at her watch. Damn, half an hour had already passed. She didn't have any sense of time at all. The person she was waiting for was late. After looking around the coffee shop, Ning Shu walked over. Sorry, something came up at the company. That's why I'm late. The man sitting opposite her, Ning Shu, apologized. Ning Shu laughed in her heart. If it was the female lead, would you be willing to let her wait for so long? Alright, if it wasn't the female lead's life, then there was no need to be pretentious. The man sitting opposite her was a male supporting character. He looked elegant and noble, and his entire body was filled with a bone-deep gentleness and elegance. However, Ning Shu could only see the words gentle supporting male lead, written on his forehead in gold. In this day and age, if there was nothing wrong with you, you couldn't be the male lead. For example, the incomparably Chinibyu Xiao Yan had become the male lead, and Li Xiuwen had become the male supporting character. Elegant, gentle, gentlemanly. These were the qualities that a good man should have. Why did a pair of lame eyes fall for that? Xiao Yan. Li Xiuwen was wearing a silver suit. Sitting opposite Ning Shu, he was as beautiful as a painting. His fingers were long and slender, and his knuckles were smooth. Why were the male lead and male supporting characters so lame that they fell for the female lead? Could it be that all men liked naive and muddle-headed women? Was it fun to follow behind the muddle-headed female lead and clean up her mess? You are. Li Xiuwen looked at Ning Shu. His voice was as gentle as water, clear and pleasant to the ears. Ning Shu felt that it was impossible for the other party not to know who she was. She was the female lead's love rival, and Xiao Yan was his love rival. Ning Shu didn't think that Li Xiuwen wouldn't know who she was. What's there to pretend for? We're both revolutionary comrades who want but can't get what we want. We're walking further and further down the path of cannon fodder. Ning Shu coughed, cleared her throat, and went straight to the point. I'm Xiao Yan's wife, I'm Ning. Su Ran, Su Ran. Li Xiuwen nodded, and looked at the watch on his wrist. Why are you looking for me? I think I'll be leaving. She made him wait for half an hour, and he had to leave in less than 5 minutes. Ning Shu took back her evaluation of Li Xiuwen. What gentlemanly! What gentlemanly! They were all shit. They were all aimed at the female lead. Don't, handsome. You're leaving so soon. You didn't make me wait for half an hour for nothing. At least let me say something. Ning Shu's words were a bit impolite. Li Xiuwen's slanted eyebrows frowned. In that case, please say it. Ning Shu sensed that Li Xiuwen's attitude towards her was a bit impatient. Su Meng must have said something bad about her in front of this guy. She must have said that she was vicious and hypocritical. Ning Shu could recite all of these words. I'm here to cooperate with you. Ning Shu said directly. I know you like Su Meng, but Su Meng gave birth to 2 children for Xiao Yan. The 2 men are so outstanding. I think Su Meng will have difficulty choosing. Li Xiuwen looked at Ning Shu with a faint smile. Then how should we cooperate? Fuck, he agreed so quickly. Ning Shu saw the smile on Li Xiuwen's face. What was the meaning of this fake smile? Ning Shu originally wanted to leave, but thinking that there was someone even more disgusting than Li Xiuwen, Ning Shu held back. She talked to Li Xiuwen and said, "If the Xiao family is gone, do you think Su Meng will choose Xiao Yan?" Li Xiuwen's eyes flashed. He shook his head and said, "Miss Su, we can't cooperate at all. I won't do anything that will make Meng Meng suffer." Ning Shu clutched her chest and almost spat out a mouthful of blood. She had completely forgotten that the supporting male character was also a man who knelt under the halo of the female lead, Mary Sue. He was the type who was heavily poisoned. He was incomparably passionate and would not stop until he died. Ning Shu looked at Li Xiuwen. How noble was this? Li Xiuwen looked at the woman opposite him. Her expression became very interesting. Her expression was so complicated that he could not describe it. Chapter 80. Ning Shu felt that her head had been kicked by a donkey, that's why she was so stupid to work with the supporting male lead. Could it be that idiocy was contagious, and she had already been infected? Speaking of the supporting male lead, Li Xiuwen, his qualifications were good, his family background was good, and he had good looks. Once he saw the female lead, he fell in love with her. When he was studying abroad, he met the pregnant Su Meng, and then took care of her until she came back. After she came back, Su Meng and Xiao Yan were together. Li Xiuwen became the female lead's good brother, and often made the male lead jealous. What kind of moral integrity was this? Li Xiuwen looked at the woman opposite him. Her expression changed a lot, and he didn't know what she was thinking. Li Xiuwen stretched out his smooth fingers and knocked on the table, making a rhythmic knocking sound, which woke up Ning Shu, who was in her own imagination. "What do you want to say?" "Sorry, I have to go first." Li Xiuwen's expression was a little gloomy. Ning Shu guessed that the other party didn't want to see her, this evil woman. Could she just kill those people, and then the mission would be considered complete? Ding! Ning Shu's brain suddenly rang with the sound of electric current. This feeling was too familiar, it had been a long time since she heard the system's voice. What the player thought is not valid, it doesn't conform to the rules of this world. Player, please dispel this thought. The original owner's soul was to change her life, and not to wake up in a women's prison. The system's voice was mechanical and cold, but for some reason, Ning Shu felt that she was ridiculed by the system. Li Xiuwen looked at the woman opposite him again. Her face was twisted, and Li Xiuwen felt that this woman was definitely crazy. Li Xiuwen shook his head and stood up, preparing to leave. He thought to himself, Xiao Yan's wife is actually crazy. When Li Xiuwen stood up, Ning Shu finally reacted. She stretched out her hand and grabbed Li Xiuwen's arm, pulling him back to sit down. She said coldly, "I say, what do you mean by this? I haven't even said anything, and you keep making a fuss about leaving. You've had enough. It won't be too late to leave after I'm done talking." Ning Shu looked at Li Xiuwen and said directly, "I want to work with you to destroy the Xiao family. I'll give you half of the stolen money as fast as possible." Li Xiuwen raised his eyebrows. "Why should I cooperate with you? And what right do you have to talk about cooperation? And you actually want half of the Xiao family's huge corporation." Li Xiu was just short of saying, "Can you be a little more shameless?" Ning Shu sneered. She took out a stack of RMB from her bag and slammed it on the table. "I have money. Let's cooperate." "But I don't think I gained anything." Li Xiuwen shrugged. "I spent so much effort to destroy the Xiao family, and in the end, I have to give half of it to you." Ning Shu almost spat on the handsome face in front of him. He said very unhappily, "Don't be unsatisfied. You can get a girl. You got Su Meng. What else do you want? You can get Su Meng. What else are you not satisfied with?" She was supposed to be the female lead, but in the end, she ended up with a supporting male character like you. You've really hit the jackpot. You've definitely defied the heavens and changed your fate. You've changed your life as a supporting male character, but you still aren't satisfied. Didn't you get Xiao Yan too? Li Xiuwen said indifferently. Pfft. Ning Shu almost spat on Li Xiuwen's face this time. He spat out all the coffee in his mouth. Half of it was because he was shocked, and the other half was because he was disgusted. He, Ning Shu's mouth twitched and he sneered. He collected all the RMB on the table and put it in his bag. Li Xiuwen saw Ning Shu's actions and asked in surprise, "Aren't we discussing how to destroy the Xiao family? You look like you're planning to leave." "Handsome, I'm leaving first," Ning Shu said expressionlessly. "You deserve to be a supporting male character for the rest of your life." Li Xiuwen blocked in front of Ning Shu. "Sit down. We're discussing. Take out all the money in your bag. Let me see how much money you have." "No," Ning Shu said righteously. "It's not safe to take it out. I'm afraid that someone will steal my money." Li Xiuwen looked at Ning Shu as if he was looking at a lunatic. In the end, Ning Shu and Li Xiuwen reluctantly reached an agreement. Why was it reluctantly? The supporting male character, this bastard, actually wanted to reduce her benefits to 10%. He was just casually giving her a little. Ning Shu couldn't tolerate this at all. If he could get the beauty, even if he lost all his family assets, he would still have profited. In the end, Ning Shu used all kinds of methods and finally reached 40% of the benefits. Friendly reminder, don't find a shell company to fish for her. In front of Su Meng, you still have to pay attention to your pure and innocent image. Ning Shu patted Li Xiuwen's shoulder and left. Ning Shu returned to the Xiao family. The house was very quiet. Ning Shu felt very happy. The two elders of the Xiao family stayed in the hospital to take care of Jin's son, and Xiao Yan didn't come back either. Ning Shu's liver and lungs were very happy, but Xiao Yan felt very sad. His children were lying on the bed like this. Looking at Su Meng's red and swollen eyes, Xiao Yan felt that if he didn't do anything, he wouldn't be worthy of being a man. Xiao Yan felt that the Su family was very annoying now. They had made so much money from the Xiao family, but they still raised such a vicious woman like Su Ran. Especially Su Bo, that old bastard, actually killed Su Meng's parents. He had to get justice for Su Meng. In the end, Xiao Yan still cooperated with the plot. But this time, there was a shadow in Su Bo's heart. He didn't take out all of the Su family's money. He kept some of his family's assets. He still didn't believe that the Xiao family would do such a thing to their teammate. When Mrs. Su called Ning Shu to tell him about this, Ning Shu just kept silent and didn't say anything. Since the Su family trusted the Xiao family and Xiao Yan so much, then let the Su family suffer a loss. Ning Shu didn't want to spend so much effort to protect the Su family, only to be pushed to Su Meng by his brainless brother. That would be a terrible thing. Ning Shu asked Li Xiuwen to act quickly. Now Xiao Yan had already acted. When Xiao Yan was at his proudest, when he was full of himself, he would give him a blow. Su Debail and Su Xiaobao, who were sick, took advantage of their illness to act coquettishly and play cute. They tried their best to bring the two together and cultivate the relationship between Su Meng and Xiao Yan. For a time, the ward was filled with the voices of the two children and pink bubbles of love. The two elders looked at each other and smiled. The picture was harmonious and beautiful, like a loving family. Every time Xiao Yan looked at Su Meng with a burning gaze. When Su Meng took something, he deliberately held Su Meng's hand, making Su Meng blush. Especially in a hidden place in the hospital, the two hugged and kissed sweetly. Not far away, there were two children watching with a mischievous expression. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.